someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it. So whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Theo!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes.
You're listening to Paranormal 411, coming to you live from an undisclosed location deep within the Appalachian Mountains, bringing you the unknown with your hosts David Reagan and Jason Scott. Paranormal 411. So how you doing, Bo?
I'm doing lovely. I'm just glad to be here.
Oh, that's good.
Honored to be here.
Thank you.
We're glad you're here.
Yes, we are. We're excited.
Oh, yeah. If anybody hasn't been on one of Bo's tours, you need to do that because it's really fun. He knows a lot about Loudon.
Yeah.
And a lot of things kind of spooky.
I love the graveyard tour. That was awesome. The graveyard tour was cool.
Best done on the full moon.
Yeah.
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't trip on things then, right?
We try to do that every full moon unless the weather's bad.
Oh.
Yeah.
So for you, those of you that don't know, Bo Carey is sixth generation
That's right.
or seventh?
Here in Loudon. Well, seventh in East Tennessee, sixth in Loudon.
Loudon Countian, with a passion for local history. He's the owner of Greer's Home Furnishings, across from the courthouse here in Loudon. He's available for tours of the Steekee Cherokee Village and Cemetery, historic Homes of Loudon, the Loudon Downtown Walking Tour, as well as lectures and groups. I can't see anymore. I'm too old. About violent East Tennessee occurrences, ranging from public hangings, which there's one story I want him to tell tonight.
Yeah.
Very good. From the Battle of Athens to the tragic feuds along the Little Tennessee River.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So we got a good historian here. If anybody wants to know the history of Loudon. You know, I was telling them last week or week before last.
Yeah, we didn't do a show last week.
We was talking about the show, and I said, yeah, when my daughter likes me to tell her stories, and I was tell her she's the queen of Loudonia, and I'm the king of Loudonia. It's pretty funny. So,
yeah.
You want to start it out, Bo?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the kind words, Jason. That's very kind. Of course, you know, when you've lived in an area as long as I have, and I'm 69 years old. I'll be 70 this year. So I've been in Loudon pretty much all my life, except a couple of years when I took a job somewhere else. So you hear a lot of stuff, and I can't claim to be an authority or that I know more than anybody else. I really give credit to some of the old timers that have shared stories with me through the years. I mean, boy, and I've been very blessed to sort of lucked into talking to some of them. And I'm going to give an example. Lamar McCall he's been passed away now he's from over in the Greenback area, moved over here, married a Blair, and worked at the post office pretty much his whole career. But boy, that man never missed a story. And I got to talk to him about it, and he said, yeah, I'll take you to some of these graveyards, and we'll see some stuff, and I'll teach you some stuff about the Greer family and about a lot of others around here. I said, well, great. And we did that, then he passed away, and Bub Morris was his best friend, and he worked at the post office with Lamar. Bub, I didn't know that he was a wealth of knowledge. Man, you're giving me credit for that, being a wealth of knowledge of local stuff. But a fella told me, he said, well, if you really want to know about these old buildings and some of the crazy stuff that's happened, call Bub Morris. And they said, you'll either catch him in a good mood and he'll wear you out with the information, or you'll catch him and he won't even talk to you. So I said, well, God, what's the best time of day to call him? And I said, well, can't tell. So I called him. It was after supper one night, and boy, I was lucky. I got him on a good night, and he shared with me stories I never thought I'd hear. And you guys have heard some of them, and I'll be glad to share more of them tonight. And then I started going down and working out at the senior center there on the river, on Main Street across from Riverview Baptist Church. And Bub would go in there and play pool in the mornings. and again, he knew I'd be in the workout room walking on the elliptical, and all of a sudden he'd walk in there with his pool cue. And I said, now, why is he walking in here? Old man. And he'd sneak up to me and tell me a story because he knew I was into it, and I would repeat it. And I give him credit. At that time, I was doing nothing but a daytime history tour. That's all. I wasn't into the occult, the paranormal, the ghost tours, cemetery stuff. I was strictly doing a daytime tour that the Loudon County Visitors Bureau had sort of put me up to. And I wasn't even charging for it. And Bub started telling me these stories because he had heard them from Lamar, and he had heard them all his life, and he had been around some of it himself. And the more I heard that, I thought, golly bum, this stuff is pretty eerie. Some of it's pretty scary. And it always seems to happen in these older buildings, And then I said, well, sure enough, Bub Morris passed away. So I just started asking around, and saying, maybe I need to verify some of this. Bub could have made all this up for all I know.
Yeah.
And I started asking some people, and sure enough, you'd ask, and they, no, I don't know anything about that. I asked, no, and then you'd ask somebody, and they'd say, oh, I can tell you about it, and they would not only verify it, but add something to it. So I never was into this stuff, but now I am. That's why I'm sort of honored to be on your all's event here, and we're kindred spirits now.
Yes.
Yeah. Once it gets a hold of you, it
takes hold.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about everything.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong with it. I started getting visited by spirits when I was 3. In my bed, they'd wake me up every single morning.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I was scared. I was 3 years old. It scared the what out of me.
Yeah.
And I'd run, scream through the house. My mom would be like, what's going on? And we'd go to church on Sundays, and the preacher was like, it's a gift, and I'm like, it's not a gift, it's not a gift, So for my whole life, I've been able to see them, and so.
You have been able to see.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And when they make themselves known, because they can make themselves where they're not, but when they make themselves known, I could see them. The last house I lived in, I saw the little girl that was there, and we caught EVPs and stuff with her.
Okay.
But, it's something that's, just been with me my whole life. So for me, it's not been a question of, do I believe in it? Because I've seen it. So,
right.
Seeing is believing.
Well, let me ask you, from 3 years old, initially, did it scare you, or it just mystify you?
It scared me.
It had to be
3.
scary at first.
But now, by the time I was 5, I got used to it, and I actually told them to leave me alone pretty much, and they did. But all the way up until then, it was scary. Now, no, they don't scare me at all anymore.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because knowing I was going to be on with y'all tonight, I talked to one of the people can I go with this, or y'all?
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Into commercials or anything?
No.
You went with me on my tour, and folks out there, if you do our ghost tour, we stop at the Shops on the Square, which is not an old building. It was built in 1952. However, back in the 1880s, it was the Moorfield family home. They were a fairly prominent family here. And when the Shops on the Square opened in 2015, in the old white store building there on the corner of Grove Street and Cedar, one of the booth holders there, who's from over in Blount County, came to me and said, Bo, I have seen a ghost girl in this building. And I said, well, this was before I started doing ghost tours, or before I started to...
Before it got a hold of you.
Yeah, thank you. And she said, I said, well, tell me about this. And she said, well, it's up in the middle aisle. Her booth was this lady's booth, and I don't mention names, but her booth is over in the right side. And she said, it's over in the second aisle beyond us. I was coming towards the back of the store on a busy day, and this young teenage girl was coming up, and said she most definitely was from another place. And she said, and like you, David, this lady that I'm telling you about, I called her this afternoon to confirm it when I was going to come on, because I was always intrigued by this story. And she said, yeah, I've had this since my childhood, like you. And she said, at first we were scared. And she said, there's a thing she kept telling me over there. She says, I never turn around and look back. I never look back at them. I always see it. I always acknowledge it. Sometimes I hear it behind me. Or I feel it, rather, she says.
I can feel,
behind me, but I don't turn around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because they can attach to somebody if they feel that if they know that they're able to see them and stuff. Yeah.
So she was telling me about this, and she said it's sort of a teenager, and said she's got long hair. It's sort of wavy hair. She's wearing a long dress. She's wearing a collar that's lace. So it's from a period maybe 100 years ago or more. And said she smiled at me, and then she passed. And I said, it just happened the one time there where the Shops on the Square is. Well, I started being the history dude that I am. I started studying. I found in the historic landmarks of Loudon County a picture from down on at the old Fleming Harrison house, Dr. Will Harrison house, which is down around where the post office is now. The wealthy people back then lived sort of down on the river. And in the picture, it identifies Mary Kate Moorfield, who would have been a little girl then, sitting on the porch. And I'd shown it to this lady, and I think she said it sort of brought chills to her. She's identified the picture to me.
Oh, wow.
But Mary Kate Moorfield lived in that house where the Shops on the Square is back in the 1880s. She died as a teenager. And so, and of course, as you may remember, we visited her grave out at the old Steekee Cemetery. But this lady told me this story again today, because I thought, that's something I'd like to know more about, especially if I'm going to talk to these guys. And that's an intriguing story. And again, I've talked to other people that I'm going to say have the gift, David, that you do, and they say, it's the type of thing now that you just acknowledge.
Yep.
And this lady lives in an old home going back to 1917 over in Blount County, and she says, there's certain rooms I won't sleep in because the feelings happen in those rooms.
Yeah.
So I live in the old Greer home place, but it's only 93 years old.
Only.
And I've been there 30-something years. I don't ever feel anything special other than there's something happens. I'll wake up at 4 a.m. and it sounds like shutters banging. I don't know what it is. And it may be the shutters are loose and the wind's blowing. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that.
No, that's
the that Mary Kate Moorfield story is pretty dear to me.
See, that's awesome.
The guy that runs the cemetery, that's the Joe Moorfield, basically not a descendant, but because she never had children, of course, but of her brother would have been his great-great-grandfather or something. And he is the president of the old Steekee Cemetery, and so he likes to keep it pretty straight and narrow and respectful of the people that are buried there. And
right.
so I'm one of his officers, and I think he wonders, what's Bo? He trying to make a carnival out of this wonderful old cemetery? But it's too late now. He already got a foot or two into it.
Those are beautiful cemeteries, though.
Yes,
they are.
Well, and Old Steekee Cemetery, that's when we do our cemetery tour, it's behind the old gates. It was originally the old Blair Cemetery, started around 1830. But for some reason, the Blairs and the Johnston family were the pioneer families of this area. And why they had acquired all that property down on the river after the Treaty of 1819, and basically the Cherokee Indians had to move on out west, but that's where they were. The Cherokee Village was where part of that cemetery is now, right on Steekee Creek. We're talking about a quarter mile past Blairland Baptist Church if you're going out the Steekee Road. And the Steekee Village was there. Pathkiller, the Cherokee leader's, his home was out there. They called it the Peachtree Place. But the Blairs built a house right there. It's that old brick house right across from Blairland Baptist Church. It was built around 1838.
Wow.
The Johnston family, which built a big white Victorian house just past the cemetery there on the bend. Folks around here know it as the Huff House.
Huff House, yeah.
Because the Huffs married into the Johnston family.
Okay.
And that cemetery was in between. But what's weird is how the Steekee Cherokee Village culture and the Blairs and Johnstons who had fought, they went to court over that property on the river, and it wasn't settled for 30 years until the Tennessee Supreme Court settled it maybe in the 1840s. And why it is that they chose to go out there and after they'd already sort of beat the Cherokees out of the expensive land on the waterfront, they went out there and got right in the middle of their village and their
oh my goodness
and everything. But I call that, we've even thought about expanding that tour beyond just the cemetery because I don't know, Jason, I think you want me maybe deal with the violent hangings, the lynchings that happened out there on Steekee Creek. I'll get to that if you want to. Yeah. But that tour that we do on the cemetery includes not only that historic cemetery that has the graves of a lot of these figures that were prominent in Loudon history, but it also has, we get to sort of view the hanging tree where those two lynchings took place in the 1880s, and then finally we visit those homes. But so there's and the place where the Steekee Village was. So I call it the Steekee Experience. We've even thought about bringing in the old Dunbar School, African American school that's almost 100 years old.
Oh wow!
And it's being restored right there on Steekee Street. And it has nothing to do with ghosts or cemeteries or any of those things. But it is historic. It is being restored. It's going to be some kind of community center or something to that nature. And it's from a history standpoint, it's pretty vital to this area.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't even know that's what that was.
Little White. It's on back closer to the, to Grove Street. Yeah. So it's. But we've talked about doing some things and stopping there and viewing it, and it's in 2025 it'll be 100 years old. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
All the black people that are they're anywhere close to my age all went to school there up until integration, and I'm sure there are some unusual stories about that place.
Probably.
Yeah. Something dinged. Are we supposed to be going to commercial?
No, that was
okay.
My phone. Are we ready to go to commercial, Jason?
No, I don't think so.
No, we've only been on for 20 minutes.
But I was, and y'all stop me or redirect, but I was mentioning that whole Cherokee phenomenon, and on our ghost tour, the for those out there that don't know, the Blair family had been positioned across the river in the early 1790s, and James Blair was the first ferry keeper. He ran the ferry. Pathkiller got to collect the toll on the south side because the Cherokees, up until that 1819 treaty, had the possession of the river on the south side, and the white settlers were on the north side. So James Blair would collect the toll on the ferry at the north side, Pathkiller on the south side. And of course, this ferry is right there where the boat ramp is now for those that launch their boat or go fishing or whatever down there in Loudon. It's where Steekee Creek empties into the Tennessee River. And so the Blairs built a storehouse around 1830 right there at the corner of Ferry Street and Main Street near the river. It's a 2-story brick house. It's not in good condition, but that's where they would bring cargo and stuff off the ferry and then unload it and position it to be purchased or bought on somewhere else. Years later, that storehouse, when somehow Pathkiller, who had the Cherokee leader who had fought for the United States down in the Creek Wars in Alabama, Georgia, but he acquired a 640-acre plot of basically what's now the riverfront of Loudon, which meant all of a sudden now he owned the ferry instead of the Blairs, and he owned the Blair storehouse instead of the Blairs, and the government was stuck in the middle. You had two different sides claiming it. It went to court. It took 20 or 30 years before it was settled in the state Supreme Court in favor of the Blairs and the Johnstons. And Pathkiller had to sort of tuck his tail between his legs and head down to the Hiawassee area, and they never saw him again. But the neat story there is the Arp family, years later, in the 1940s, I guess, had made that a little country grocery store. And that was the Arp Grocery. And the lady that owns the place now, Ms. Donna Seward, has told me that when she first purchased the building, that she would talk to the Arp family, and that numerous members of the Arp family said that when they were running it back, 70 years ago, that at least twice they saw a figure, sort of like a whirlwind, a spirit coming out of the back and going up to the front window of that storehouse, and sort of sitting there. He's a swarthy little dark-skinned man, and he would maybe smoke a pipe and just look out through the window. We think that's probably Pathkiller looking out, bemoaning the loss of his of all that he had there, and it's been seen a couple of times. Well, I was doing this tour back in November or December, and I mentioned it, and these young ladies who had grown up down there in what a lot of us refer to as Mexico, down along the river, the old mill houses, and they said, we used to see that figure in that window from outside.
Really?
I said, which window? Because I knew which one they told me, and they said, that one right over there. And I said, wow, there's some. It's always good to have a little verification if you're out telling hundreds of people a story. And so we think, that whole dynamic between the Blairs and the Johnstons and Pathkiller is very unique. Pathkiller had a daughter named Suki who married some of those white families, and there's
the blood running through.
The blood's running. Yeah, it's probably still around here today, and I know the Eldridges, the Gardenhires, even some of the Carmichaels are supposedly part of that whole interrelationship that occurred. So it's pretty interesting. It's a lot of confusion though. There was two Pathkillers, and I don't know that it's father son, but the records are not really good. Sarah Simpson Bivens has written a book in the last year called Blair's Ferry, and she researched it pretty well, the whole Pathkiller thing, and if any, I know you can purchase those at the Carmichael Inn actually.
Oh wow!
At the Carmichael Inn, I saw it in there yesterday. There's a basket full of those books called Blair's Ferry, which was the name of this town in the 1790s. It shows in the records that I have that Jenny Carmichael married James Blair, the ferry keeper, in 1799 in Blair's Ferry, Tennessee. So there you go.
Wow.
We were Blair's Ferry, and then the 1850s we were Blairsville, and it was 1858 before we became Loudon.
Wow. And
So
what was with the name changed?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Why did they change it to Loudon from?
Well, of course, the first, think with me. So it's 1840s. The lawsuit's settled. The Blairs have taken control. Pathkiller's gone on, and now it's theirs to deal with. Well, James Blair's son, Wiley Blair. Now, there's one for you. Wiley Blair, his third son, was the one that was the entrepreneur. He says, we got this property now. He had married one of the Johnstons, who were also in the lawsuit with Pathkiller. So between his wife and him, they had full control of the waterfront. And he saw that the train that just had started running up to Loudon from Georgia ended right there where our highway bridge is now, sort of down where the police station is. And he said, that train can't go across the river. There's no bridge, and all that cargo, all those people, all the passengers, everybody's got to go somewhere. So our waterfront's going to take off. And he started selling plots. Wiley Blair, the greatest entrepreneur in our town's history, started selling plots to, and people knew that this town's going to grow fast. It only did during those 1850s because everything that came off the train or got on the train had to make that transition on the water. So we became a huge riverfront town and a railroad town. And we had a daily newspaper. We had a dance school. We had a college. We had 5 hotels. We were growing faster than Atlanta, people. Wow. And of course, as I tell people, late in the 1850s, they built the railroad bridge and things moved on, and we went back to being Mayberry. But it's but one of the really unique pieces of that is that Wiley Blair, the entrepreneur, probably made some good money, and he started building his home across the river. It's that big white house with pillars just before you get to the Justice Center.
Oh yes, that really pretty one.
He built that in 1857, before the Civil War. But then he died. He had a disease and died before he could ever live in it. During the Civil War, the federal troops came in and took over that house, made it their headquarters. To this day, Wiley Blair's ancestors live in that house. But I found an old article from the Loudon County News-Herald from 1970s about the ghosts of that house.
Oh, wow.
And I should have brought it, but you can research it. And there were ghosts in that house, and the family talks about it. Now, here's what's very unusual. Waller Henry, the descendant of Wiley Blair that lives there to this day, his family also has what's known as the Cannon Callaway house down between here and Philadelphia, just past the American Legion. Big brick, Italianate-style house. Beautiful house. And that's the house he grew up in. And there are ghosts in that house. There's a separate article about that. Now, I don't know if it's followed the Wiley Blair family around, but it's enough unique stories that the family has heard. In the parlor, somebody's sitting in there, and they go say, well, we got a relative visiting or something. They go back to ask Mama about it and come back, and that person's not there anymore.
Oh, wow.
In the Cannon Callaway house, the beautiful brick house on the left as you go from Loudon to Philadelphia. Same kind of, everything seemed to happen, I think, upstairs in the Wiley Blair home across the river. And we're talking about between Loudon and Lenoir City. That was could it have had something to do with the invaders, the rude Yankee troops that took over the house for a few years? We don't know. But those two homes, which happen to have a relationship with that Blair family, have both been had enough sightings or stories told by family members that they've both been written up at separate times. I know that our retiring police chief, James Bear Webb, actually was a good friend of Walter Henry's, and he lived in that house, the Wiley Blair house across the river when he was a young man, and he shared the stories in one of those articles. So when we can verify something with the police chief as testimony, I think that's pretty good. So that was the other incident that would maybe relate to the Civil War is on Wharf Street. And when we talk about the 1850s prime time when Loudon was growing so fast, Wharf Street went all the way from the river down between the police station and the highway bridge. And that sidewalk marks where it was, from the wharf all the way up, and there was no highway then, so it crossed by the fountain and went on up towards the Presbyterian Church. Well, that the old Colony building, as people know it now, 2-story brick on Wharf Street, sort of next to what people know today as the old SunTrust Bank branch, but it's now the Cook and Craft place. That was built around 1850 during the heyday. It was the Masonic Hall. It was also, though, captured by the Federal troops. Now, the Confederate sympathizers, maybe the Masonic members or whatever that had control of that prior to the war, were smart enough to build a secret shaft in the left side of that building. And they would cover it up with straw or just a board or something where you didn't see it, just to the side of the stairwell. And apparently, right when they knew they were going to have to, around 1862 or 63, when they had to abandon it to the onslaught of the Federal troops, they covered that up, but they put some valuables in there. When they did so, sure enough, the Union troops took over. They used it as a hospital downstairs. Officers stayed there as well. The horses were downstairs. The hospital part was upstairs in this big, nice 15-foot high ceiling upstairs. It's an apartment now. And but that's the Federal troops, as long as they were there, never found it. After the war, the Masons took over again, and of course, I'm not a Mason, but I'm told that their rituals, their initiations are quite, they got the robes, they've got the paraphernalia. Mm-hmm. It's quite an impressive, but I guess you could say mysterious ceremony. And all of that, their initiation and other stuff was upstairs. And a number of people through the years came up there and were, when they shouldn't have, and they were pretty scared of what they saw. But again, there's a mystic nature of that building. Mm-hmm. The whole bit about the valuables in the shaft has some mystique to it, to the point that after the Civil War, lots of things happened in that building. It was a church. It was a bank. It's been, in recent years, a bail bond company, a title company. It's now, I think, a heat and air place in there. But back when it was a title company, the girls that worked there shared with me that they had seen a spirit, some type of a form coming from the bank vault in the back when it had been a bank and going up, sure enough, right to where that secret shaft was. Now, whether they knew they were checking out the valuables or what, I don't know. And then the next iteration, that after the bonding company, that was the bonding company, but the girls that had been in the title company before that shared the same story. So that's pretty neat. Wow. And again, you're in an old building, 1850s era, and there's some real history there. There's some mystique, and so these are the type of great stories I hear from other people, and so it's always seems to be in the old buildings. I shared about Mary Kate Moorfield. Well, that's not an old building, but again, it was her family home there before it was ever a grocery store.
Right.
Yeah. So I can keep going, or y'all can do some other stuff you got to do.
Well, I'm going to ask about, did they ever find the valuables?
The Union troops never did. Supposedly, and Gerald Augustus, who has written the book, Loudon County During the Civil War, he shares that a little bit about that story. Bob Richardson, that had, his family had Richardson's Pharmacy. He is the current owner of that building, and I'm having a blank moment here, thinking who's told me this story about the. I think it's in some of the. I think there's a Loudon County history book that was put together a few years ago, and I think it's in there. But yeah, I don't know, but no, I don't think the Union troops ever found it. And once they got out of there, I think some of the Confederate folks came back in and
took it back.
Yeah, they got what they left.
I've been in that building a few times, and it is kind of spooky.
Is it? I've never been in there.
It does have real tall ceilings.
It's really nice. I mean, it's to have an upstairs apartment with 15-foot ceilings.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah.
That's pretty.
I'm thinking when, I don't know, it's probably in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. I think there was an office in there for outside plant services that worked over at Staley's. And that's where my stepdad worked, and we'd go in there.
Yeah.
It's pretty spooky.
At one time, the News Herald was in there. It's had a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Loudon County News Herald, and I'm trying to think. When I was a kid down on Wharf Street, where that SunTrust Bank is, the Cook and Craft, it was just a vacant lot, and that's where us kids would play ball. And if you could hit a ball up over the railroad tracks, you're pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good ways too.
Yeah. And but that was, and we were always, as kids, we always wondered, that building over there. Not sure what's going on there, but yeah, I guess the Masons had it up until the 1960s or 70s when they moved up to.
Is that where they're up here?
They're up on Marymount Road, now. But and I've thought about asking some of those older Masons a little more about it and see what they know.
One of them told me when I was there that I guess he was kind of the historian there at the Masonic Lodge, and he told me that there wasn't ever even a mention of a charter here in Loudoun County. And he was talking to me a little bit about that, how he had to dig in to see how the Masonic Lodge even came here to Loudoun County, or to Loudoun itself. Because in their bookkeeping, there's no mention of the charter until more recent times.
Well, again, I'm not a Mason,
right?
But my great grandfather, John Greenway Greer, was I don't remember if they called it the Grand Worshipful Master or something.
Yep.
He was on a state level. He and a Mr. Tipton, and to this day they call it the Greer Tipton Lodge, I believe. And when they were celebrating at least their 100th anniversary of that lodge, they came to me and got us to sponsor, because got Greer's to sponsor an ad. And I learned a lot about, so you can look at their leaders through the years, going back to the 1800s.
Yeah, they've got them in there.
And you see the Harrisons, you see Blairs, you see Johnstons and Huffs and Robinsons and the names that through the years have been very prominent in our town. Some of them, there was a Hosea Harrison, who apparently served as the leader 10 or 12 different years. They maybe couldn't get anybody else. I don't know. But it's they've been there a long time now. The charter part I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But I know you're probably talking about Bob Richardson, that currently owns the business, and he is definitely a historian, a local historian. He knows some. I would put him up there with Bub Morris of people that know the old stories, and
right.
He's the kind of guy I like to listen to.
Yeah.
One of the things that when on the ghost tour I do, that again, that you guys did it with me. I think you both did.
Yep, we did.
And,
it was awesome.
Probably half of my stuff is stuff that really has a haunted or a ghost or a story behind it. The other half is hokum that I throw out there. I'm probably more of a comedian than I am and as my daughter says, Dad, you're just way too hokey with this stuff. But that part's all fun. I mean, we can dwell on that if you want. But I'm trying to share with you the ones that these old timers and people have shared with me that do have that scary tint to them. And, one of them is the what was the old Loudon Motor Company. Now, today it's Serendipity. It's an old brick building there, at the corner of Commerce Street and Grove Street. It's Serendipity. It's a women's clothing store now. It had been the Red Door a few years ago, and it was the first place they sold cars in Loudon. And it was the Loudon Motor Company and later the Ford dealership. But they would, Mr. Bill Miller, who had been actually handled, I think, their parts department there years and years and years ago before he went to Viscase. But he shared with me that the owners were Peg Bell, and that would have been the same Bells we're talking about where the unknown soldier is. But Peg Bell, or Henry Bell, was a state senator. And Mr. Henry Giffen was his partner, and they started that as the Loudon Motor Company. They would, up at the railroad, they would bring in these A model and T model Fords and then roll them down the hill to put into their showroom and sell or put out in front of that building. So that was the original Ford Motor Company. The story is that Mr. Peg Bell, at some time he was into politics and whatnot, and he chose to move on and sell out his interest, thinking that all these newfangled cars aren't going to be a big deal in the future. And of course, he came to regret that decision. But this is some of the, and forgive me for speaking to professionals about the paranormal here, but one of the ladies I know that pursues the paranormal and enjoys it, and tell me that this is where they've actually, and you guys correct me, they actually have the meters or whatever. Mm-hmm. They've measured energy there in that window, sort of facing the across Upper Grove Street, and that all we can figure is that the story we've heard is that old Mr. Senator Bell always regretted, and maybe his desk was right there in that window, and that's why this energy is there. So who knows? But that's again is a building that goes back, I'm sure, a century.
That was actually part of your tour too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
We share
that's
that
right there beside the Limerick Theater.
Yeah, exactly. It's right below the theater.
Yep.
And the absolutely, that's exactly right. The within earshot of that, of course, is what used to be the Friendly Florist back on Grove Street, next to what's now the Seashell Museum. On Wharf Street. The 2-story brick building, and it's under some remodeling now to become I think it goes back to about 1921, so it's at least a century old. And the story that was shared with me there by some people that had owned the building is the upstairs apartment. There was a lady that was a hairdresser, and she, she lived in the apartment. I think she had a little girl daughter, and she did ladies' hair there. And you walked up an outside stairwell to get there, and she had a regular clientele. She lived there. Her whole life was centered there. And I don't know if she went through some bad times or what, but the story is that she committed suicide, and probably in that apartment. The people that operated that building and had maybe 4 apartments upstairs throughout from maybe 1990 to 2010 or later, it was a habit that every time a tenant moved out of an apartment, you would clean it up really good and probably paint it. Mm-hmm. Just give it a whole fresh look for the new tenants that you're trying to bring in. And they said, Bo, consistently, every time we would clean that out, we would find hair rollers, bits of hair, or hair salon paraphernalia. So we know that we cleaned this thing spotless, top to bottom, last time somebody moved out. But 2 or 3 times, this stuff that a hairdresser would have would pop up along the corners of the wall, the cornices and whatnot. And they said it is amazing. And this is what's unique. They didn't. Bub Morris told me the story about the suicide and all that. these people that owned it didn't know about it. So
wow.
those two stories sort of merged with me.
Yeah.
the folks that operated the place and found the stuff didn't know about the suicide or who had lived there. So
did they even know that it was used for that purpose?
I was telling them about that, and they said, "Whoa, stop. Let us tell you what we know about that room." And I thought, "Oh God, that's pretty eerie, So that's those are the ones that along our tour that definitely have some stories that either old timers or modern day people have shared that something different was going on. I tell the story about Dr. J.R. Watkins, and of course the Watkins name is still plenty of Watkinses around here, but they go back a couple hundred years in this community. And Dr. Watkins' office was right there on Wharf Street, and the Richardson Pharmacy is on the corner facing the fountain. And Dr. Watkins had a stomach medicine that was, I guess, in the 1950s, 60s, that was extremely, people sent in for it from all over the world, all over the country, I should say. And they would mail it out at Richardson's Pharmacy. And the pharmacists there have verified to me, yeah, we'd mail that famous stomach medicine out all over. Now, I maybe have embellished because what some of the old timers said, well, it was a white powder that made you feel real good. maybe Doc was ahead of his time. I don't know, but in all seriousness, it was a stomach medicine, and people swore by it. And the Richardson Pharmacy mailed it out to 50 states in the Union. There's not a ghost story here, but
that's
you got me thinking
good.
about what was happening up and down Wharf Street there, and I've shared, on my ghost tour about where his I guess his sister Granny Watkins in that house across from right there on Wharf Street was where I refer to as my house of horrors, where I would get trapped in the basement watching Wolfman movies, or got to see chickens run around with their heads cut off, and where I was actually strapped down in Bob Cassidy's mad scientist lab, and they were going to do a lobotomy on me and swap brains, and so that sort of messes you up from childhood. I've been warped ever since.
Yeah.
My own little ghost story.
Have you ever seen any paranormal?
I have to admit I haven't.
That's me.
So you too, huh? I love hearing about it. I love chronicling it, and as you guys know better than anybody, people love you to share that with them. So I guess I'm a medium. I'm a middle guy. I'm open. I want everybody listening tonight. I want them to share with me stories they know, especially about the Loudon area. But yeah, it's it amazes me now that I have started studying it, keeping track, sharing stories, how interested people are in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's I think a lot of people could think the original Ghost Hunter show when it aired on the Sci-Fi Channel so many years ago. It's brought into the mainstream what a lot of people didn't want to talk about or would shut away, and it made it where people were thinking, oh, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And it's only grown since then,
Everybody's ghost hunting.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah, you've got a lot of people that do it. And, I think that depending on how you do it, if it's good or not, because you can provoke things and get negative responses, but it doesn't necessarily mean that entities are negative. If it's like Jason's first experience was with me at my old house, and he wouldn't come to my house for 2 weeks afterwards.
Like I said, I've never seen anything, but I have on the devices that we used.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I've seen the results from it.
Yeah.
And it's spooky.
So the EMF detector was going crazy. The energy, and it was sitting on his lap. Tell him the story. Tell him the story.
We were working together, and David comes up to me. Now, this is going to be in the book, too.
Yeah.
David comes up to me at work and says, I think my house is haunted. When we investigate it. So I said, yeah, okay. Wasn't doing nothing else after work. Go over there and get to his house, and supposedly it's this
little girl that
little girl.
Yeah.
He was telling me a little girl. It would mess with his stereo and his surround sound and everything and turn it all the way up. He said you could see the knob moving.
Yep. We played a game every morning almost on weekends. Man, that little girl did.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Play a game.
Yeah, so I'd be sitting there watching TV. Everybody else would be asleep. And the surround sound would go to max volume. And the only way to do that is to turn the knob.
Sure.
And so I'd take the remote and start turning it down, and it should turn it back up. And we'd do that for 10, 15 minutes or so. And I'd finally say, okay, we got to stop doing this now because we're going to wake everybody else up. It'd stop.
It would stop.
Yep, wouldn't do it no more. Amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's what you guys make a good pair. See, that's a good team. You've experienced it. Jason's sort of like me, but he's he makes it all work, and you all can cover. My daughter took me, and this is when you talk about you've seen the
EVPs.
Yeah. My daughter said, "Well, Dad, you need to see how the rest of the world does ghost tours." So she lives over in Franklin, Middle Tennessee. It's an old historic town like Loudon. So we go, and guy's taking us, and he's really good. But what he's doing is, and I've thought about whether I could do this, but he would stop at a place, and of course, I noticed when you can sit back and watch somebody else do it instead of trying to carry the conversation, you sort of you observe things. And I noticed that the people going on these ghost tours, a lot of them really want you to scare the hell out of them.
Yes,
they want it, and I don't mean with somebody jumping behind a tree.
Right.
They really want
an experience.
That's right. And sometimes I'm just cracking jokes, but one thing that this young man did that I wish I could do, and maybe down the road we can, is he would carry his iPad, and he would say, we were at this house where this lady lived in 1910, and she something unique happened here. Mm-hmm. And while I was doing this tour 5 years ago, somebody took a picture and said, here's the picture. Mm-hmm. And you see a face up in the window.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I thought, wow.
Yep.
I said, I need to do that. Of course, I got to have a picture. But so my daughter's knowing me. She says, Dad, don't go photoshopping, putting a stupid fake picture on.
Yep. On what you do is you encourage everybody to take photos.
Okay.
And share with you on your page.
Right. There you go.
Anything that they find, and then you get to use that in all of your stuff. So encourage them to share on Facebook, share wherever, that they're on the tour and all this stuff, and take 1 million photos. And if they catch something, share it with you. And that's how a lot of those people do that.
I got to tell you, when this guy showed that, I was sitting down on a step. There were 18 people there, and I'm thinking, I do ghost tours, but I hadn't told him that. I didn't want him to give me any special attention. And he threw that thing out there and went, whoa. And I stood up and started getting chill bumps. And I said, now, that's something I hadn't done.
Yes.
And it was, so you're saying that makes sense.
Yes.
David, ask everybody if they've got something like that, get it to me.
Yes.
That was, and he had 2 or 3 things like that. And Franklin's got a real old past, that really was a Civil War town.
Yeah.
So there again, I think if I had to do a theory, I would say that spirits are stirred by invasions of something that's not wasn't part of their normal lifetime. And I say that because these, what am I looking at here?
So this is that house that I lived in.
Yeah.
You see
before here.
Yep. You see over here in this side.
Yeah.
You see it looks like a little girl hanging upside down. Yeah, that was.
Oh my goodness!
That was my ex-stepson taking a photo of himself for Facebook, and caught her in the background. Yeah.
Wow.
And Jason's story is about her.
That you're going to put in the book?
Yeah. The one we was talking about. So I go in, sit down in David's chair, and I got this
EMF detector.
EMF detector, and it was recording EVPs too. And I would go down, swoop it toward my knee, and that thing would just go crazy. Just beep, 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 beep.
When you would sweep it towards your knee.
Yeah, put it on my knee, and it was just going crazy. I'd lift it up, and it would stop. And I ain't got nothing in my pockets, metal or screws in my knee or anything. I said, I asked the question, I said, are you sitting on my lap? And we played that recording back, and you hear a little girl saying, yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And I said, David, I got to go.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
And you did.
And I left.
Yeah, it took 2 weeks before I got him back.
Well, see, you all, that the first time can I say Dark Corona?
Mm-hmm.
You're not got a copyright
No.
lawsuit or anything.
No.
When you first notified me that, and I guess Sean about the Carmichael Inn and whatnot, and so we checked out the podcast that you did solo, Jason, and I said I've not heard these stories. That's my old family home,
Yeah.
and I heard some others, but those are pretty, but you got to realize that's two different buildings. Yes. One is the 1850s brick building where the tavern is now. That was the old Wilson place, whereas the Carmichael Inn, of course, was the log structure next door that came from across the river. Well, there again, a lot of the stories that you shared on that podcast were current day. Mm-hmm. What current people that were running the coffee? You said the barista, and but that's somebody has disrupted things. We modern day people, namely my mother, have picked up that log building and carried it across the river, rebuilt it, basically disrupted the way the way things were. Mm-hmm. And then now you take an old Wilson or the Ebenezer Johnston storehouse and you turn it into a coffee shop and then a bar, and all of a sudden, but the stories y'all share are pretty eerie about the guy going down in the basement, and
yes.
then you said it was
being locked
in. That's I never heard that, but and I used to as a kid help clean that basement out. I don't go down there without other people now,
right?
And and then of course the music thing. I mean that's crazy that I guess and even a voice that said don't turn it off or whatever, and then the chairs and all that. Over on the Carmichael Inn, the log side being turned up at night and then being put down the next day. The story that was shared with me that I don't know that you guys had mentioned was that when they opened it up here a couple of years ago again as the new restaurant, Carmichael Inn, over on the log side, the stairway upstairs, Kenny Mays was the first chef they had there. Yep. And young man trained in, cooking down in Florida, but his family lives out past Polecat Creek. And twice, I think, he was going down the stairs just bringing supplies and got pushed. So y'all do know about that. Maybe you didn't tell me though. I think
no
proprietor.
That's who told us too.
And, and that he was pushed, and he would turn around and say,
because he's skeptical himself, know.
Where did that come from?
Yeah,
and you don't get pushed downstairs when nobody's up there without something wacky going on.
Well, I think is the upstairs is the apartment or
the apartment's above on the brick side.
On the brick side.
Okay,
and I think you had
that's what I
mentioned the lady who was up there heard a baby's voice maybe or the drawers of a chest going in and out.
I can't remember what it was. I mean, I've just wrote about it too.
Yeah,
here recently.
One of the ladies that lived in that studio apartment of the brick side, the tavern, had apparently said that not only had she heard a baby's voice like crying or something, but the drawer, at least one of the drawers on a chest, would actually slide out on its own, and that's pretty crazy. That's on the tavern side, the brick side, right. And that's the 1850 building. That building has been everything from an African American church to a glove factory through the years.
Wow!
And yeah, it's really got some history. It is where of course the young man that came there and built it up in the 1850s made a fortune selling cotton during the Civil War, and he's the one, of course, that married the Johnston girl. They went to New York City, and they proceeded to marry their children off to the fabulously rich and famous the Astor family, the Vanderbilts and European royalty. So there's a book being written about that by Kate Claybo, is the librarian here at the Loudon Library. She's done a ton of research called The Marrying Wilson. So I hope that'll be available.
Oh,
later.
That's cool.
And yeah, so it has no, I don't think it has any occult or ghost or paranormal stories to it, other than the building to this day has obviously had some pretty crazy stuff. I'm just glad it's being used, and that there's activity, and it's a gathering place for Loudon now, you know.
And the wife was always interested in that one that's for sale up there on that you was talking about earlier.
Storehouse.
The old storehouse. We was always interested in trying to see about how much they was wanting for that place.
Well, I don't know, but it's going to take a lot of work, but I sure hope something happens there. That's there's 2 or 3 places that around Loudon that really have to be salvaged. That one, of course, again goes back to 1828, I believe. Built with slave labor. The bricks came out of or the mud from Steekee Creek, you know, and
wow,
and you could call it Path Killer's Revenge or whatever you want to call that place, but it could be a pretty neat place, especially when the waterfront or when the riverfront development builds up. The other one is the Bowman House out in what's now Tellico Village, but George Bowman was a federal agent, a Cherokee agent for the Cherokees, and he was a German descent, built it in 1830. And it's out in the Tanassi neighborhood now. It was he somehow 2-story brick building, but both places 2-story brick buildings, and the windows are off. The rain and the elements are coming in, and it's a shame. Something needs to be done. And we're encouraging some of the clubs and things out in Tellico Village to maybe take it on as a project. I'm hoping that the lady that owns the storehouse there in Loudon will do something, or probably sell it off at a
has a
decent
for sale
price.
sign on it.
Yeah, it does.
It does.
I haven't seen that.
On the if you look on the actual non-brick side, the other side of it, there's a for sale sign and a number on there. The wife and I took it down last week or the week before last because we was wanting to call to see how much I was wanting for it.
That'd be interesting. I know that when you walk by on the Ferry Street side, down underneath the basement, they've got the bars, and it's sort of spooky looking. And every time I take a ghost tour by there, people get, what's down there? And invariably, at least twice, a black cat has come out and walked in front of them.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. Adds to the mistake.
They couldn't have planned that any better, huh? That's funny. Yeah, we actually looked through the windows, and you know, surprisingly, with, like you said, the windows being busted out and all that other stuff, the floors look in really good condition. The joists look in really good condition. I mean, it must have just been, you know, good lumber and stuff that they used for the place. I don't know, but there's still old antiques in there.
Inside, the stairwell's rotted out. There's a ladder to get up to the upstairs, but once you go upstairs, I went with her one day. 10 or 12 years ago, she was saying, well, I think I'd like to make this into a fancy French restaurant. I said, I don't know if Loudon's going to go for that. I just don't think we can make that successful. So it's the jury's out. Hope something good happens about it. You had asked about the we can save this, or you'd asked about the hanging, the Andy Taylor story.
Yeah, we can take a break and come back. You can tell us that.
Great.
Andy Taylor.
Great.
Oh, that's a good cliffhanger, everybody. So this next when we come back, Bo's going to tell us about the Andy Taylor hanging at the courthouse. So stay tuned. This is a good story, huh, Jason?
Oh yeah.
So
it's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, that was when Jason was like, "We got to make sure he tells his story." So remember, you're listening to Paranormal 411. Your hosts are Jason and David, and we've got Bo Carey on tonight, and talking to us about some Loudon history and some nice, good Loudon spookiness, and we'll be back right after this quick break.
In a world on the edge of oblivion, go to paranormal411.org for all of your paranormal, extraterrestrial, and cryptid needs. This is Jeff Reagan of the band Catalyst. Visit Paranormal 411. Click on our link on the right-hand side to listen to or purchase any of our albums on BandLab.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Paranormal411. Join us on the website at paranormal411.org. It's free to sign up and become a member. All of our upcoming shows are on the guest and events page. You can also listen to past shows on the website as well. And if you like the show and want to support us, you can do that by becoming a premium member for only $2 a month. Thanks for listening to Paranormal 411. Join us. Thanks for listening to the show. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Paranormal411. Join us on the website at paranormal411.org. It's free to sign up and become a member. All of our upcoming shows are on the guest and events page. You can also listen to past shows on the website as well. And if you like the show and want to support us, you can do that by becoming a premium member for only $2 a month. Thanks for listening to Paranormal 411. Join us.
Well, I'm way too loud and I'm way too proud, and I've been called a fool a time or two, because I drink and I smoke and I always have a joke about all the hell that I put myself through. And I've got a few old friends that the good times never end. One call and there's a party on tonight. Well, I'm a rambling man and I do the best I can. You know my mama, she tried to raise me some hearts along the way, too many names for me to say. You know I never meant to do no harm. I go through the bottom of a bottle, trying to wash away my sorrow, just to wind up with another in my arms. And I've been through hell and half of Georgia, and you know I need to warn ya, I've never been one to turn down a fight. I've got fire in my veins and trouble is my name. I have never been accused of being late, because nothing's gonna change me. This you need to know. Hard living is the only life I know. If you can't take the ride, I said I guess you need to go. But if you have got what it takes, then welcome to the show.
All right. We're back after that long break.
That was a nice little long break.
Yeah, it was.
Hopefully it gave you time to go do what you needed to do. So remember, we are live on Spreaker. We're also live on Podbean. You could also come to paranormal411.org. Sign up, become a member. It's free. Right, Jason?
Oh, yeah.
Then you come in here on Friday nights into our live show and chat room. Come chat with us, especially if you're signed in. You can chat with us really good then.
Yeah, if these guests, if you would just sign up and become a member, you can, you'd be able to chat with us. Not just hear the podcast, but you can chat too.
Yeah.
And it's totally free.
Yep. We promise it don't cost a dime. And the same thing if you decide to go to Spreaker or Podbean, and you could also chat with us there. There's chat rooms in those that are linked to us also. So, but we want to thank everybody that's on. And remember, tonight we're talking with Mr. Bo Carey. We're doing some haunted Loudon history and some Loudon history in general, which is awesome. I'm a history guy. I love history. So, getting to hear stuff like that, especially about where you're living, is awesome.
Somebody's got to keep these stories going,
Yeah, it gives depth to where you live. You know, it's not just a place. You know, it's something. So
I look for stuff all the time about Loudon. I don't see how you find all that.
Well, again, I've been doing this a while. Keep working at it.
I never.
he done this before there was an internet.
I never knew the story you're about to tell until I heard it from you. And by the way, you are a good storyteller.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the gift of gab. That's the Irish. We are storytellers. The gift of gab, you know, and it's also part of being a lifelong salesman. You know, you got to be able to tell a story.
Relate, right? You got to relate.
Absolutely. But you got to be truthful.
Oh yeah.
So you want me to launch into the courthouse phenomenon, or do you have any more housekeeping to do?
Nope.
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. It's all you.
Back, you got in 1870, we became Loudon County, and the south part of Loudon County came out of Monroe. We took a little bit of Philadelphia came from Monroe County, and over Greenback came from Blount County, and then what's mostly in Lenoir City and downtown Loudon all came out of Roane County. A lot of the wild and woolly part of Loudon County in 1870, when we became our own county, was over in the Roane County area around Cave Creek and what's now Dogwood, Lake Awana, Buttermilk Road area, up and down there, south of the river. All that area, there were some pretty rough hombres, hard living people. And one of them was a guy named Robert Taylor, who probably got in trouble. He was one of about 8 boys, and their mama had a hard time. It's sort of like that Merle Haggard song, you know, about Mama tried, but she couldn't keep him in line. And this one Robert, I think he probably got kicked out of the house. He drifted down to Chattanooga, working on the river docks. Got in a dispute with an old fellow that was his supervisor and just pulled a gun out and shot him in the head and killed him, which is a brutal murder. And the locals there liked the old man, of course, and didn't understand why this guy from up in Loudon County would do such a thing. He jumped in his rowboat and paddled on all the way up the river back to Loudon County. The authorities caught him, the Loudon County authorities caught him out there around Eaton's Crossroads. He almost escaped. I mean, these guys were brutal. They would do anything. He hit one of them in the back of the head there at the Eaton house, Dr. Eaton's house, and about got away. The sheriff got him and railed him in the head, took him back to Hamilton County, Chattanooga, and realized that to have a trial there after such a heated murder was probably not a good idea. So they're going to put him on the train and bring him up to Knoxville to go to trial. And somewhere down around Sweetwater, 2 of his brothers, Andrew and John, jumped on the train. And about the time they got to Philadelphia, they were pretty wily. They figured it out. They knew there was no telegraph coming through the small area of Philadelphia. And so that's when they jumped out, and they knew it. There was a sheriff of Hamilton County and the deputy, and they had Robert Taylor handcuffed. And the deputy had the keys to the handcuffs, so they shot him, and before they threw him off the train, they got the handcuff keys. And then Andrew shot the sheriff and kicked him off the train. Now, there you go. There. So who killed the sheriff?
Who shot the sheriff?
Who shot the sheriff? Andy Taylor. Andy Taylor killed the sheriff of Hamilton County. But
he didn't kill the deputy.
He didn't kill the deputy. That's right. And they threw them both off the train, rolled on up the way. The gunfire that went on in that passenger car not only killed the sheriff and the deputy, but it also wounded John and Robert. Later, the fatal wound to the guy that started it all, murdering. He never, I don't think, went to trial. Mm-hmm. Well, he went to trial, but he never lived to be executed. I think the wound got the best of him. And later the brother, I think, got in another scrape and got injured. John. Andy Taylor escaped and went out into the area, Midwest, Indiana, and on out to Missouri, and was just a fugitive. And he was staying on somebody's farm and trying to court their wife. He's a bad dude, and trying to sneak.
Wow.
Even though
The drifter.
the farmer, yeah, he's a drifter. The farmer was letting him stay on his land, but when the farmer was out farming the fields, he was trying to make hay with his wife. And he started bragging on how he'd killed a sheriff back in Tennessee, and the whole thing blew up, and they caught him and brought him back for justice. They got him to Knoxville, and were going to bring him down to the Loudon jail. He actually, on the train, reached and grabbed a gun. A cinder blew out of the boiler car or the timber car and went in I think the sheriff's eye, and he was temporarily blind. And Andy grabbed his gun and was about to shoot him, and the sheriff knocked it loose, and they cursed each other. And he said, "By God, Sheriff, if you hadn't disrupted me, I would have killed you." I mean, he just said that. That's the kind of guy he was. They got him down to Loudon. At that time, again, we were a new county. We hadn't been a county more than about 12 or 14 years, and the jail was right there where the dumpster is at the foot of the bridge, sort of in the courthouse annex, Carmichael Inn parking lot. And they put him in jail, took him to trial in the upstairs courtroom of the courthouse that's there today. Judge Samuel Rogers, who later became known as the hanging judge. Andy Taylor cursed him and refused to never deny that he had killed the sheriff of Hamilton County, but again was very insolent, pretty bad attitude, and the judges don't like that kind of stuff. And Judge Taylor said, "I sentence you to death and to hang until you were dead. Which just made Andy even madder. They put him in jail. The morning of the hanging was going to be they had a scaffold set up on the east lawn of the Loudon Courthouse. It was a rainy morning. The street was muddy there, Locust Street, that separates the courthouse from what's now the courthouse annex parking lot. They tried to bring Andy one last meal. He wouldn't eat it. He said, "I just want to smoke a cigar." The preachers came to talk to him and try to get him to maybe repent or have some final prayer with him. He refused to do that. A lot of cursing going on. They finally brought him over to the scaffold. He got up on the scaffold and once again sort of swore a curse on Loudon County. That's what some observers thought. We don't know if that's true or not. And it took 17 minutes for his pulse to go away, which may be why they don't do hangings to kill people anymore. That's what the doctor presiding said. But either way, it was the last legal hanging in this entire East Tennessee area. It was right there in 1883 in the courthouse lawn, closest to the side closest to the river of the Loudon County Courthouse. Well, moving forward, things started happening sort of weird around that courthouse, and probably the first thing was one of the clerk and masters told me that he would hear outside his office, out on the front of the courthouse, and out where the various war memorials and plaques and things are. His spare office was right there on the very front by the courthouse entrance. And he would hear what sounded like a couple of lawyers saying, "Well, we ought to just hang the blankety-blank guy. We ought to just hang him right now." And he would go out there and say, "There's nobody there." Happened twice. And that was odd. A little bit later, they had the custodians of the courthouse would come in, and they would typically come in at night after the courthouse closed and would clean everything up, including the upstairs courtroom. And at some point, they came to the circuit court clerk that oversaw their work and said, "We'd like to quit doing this at night." And they said, "Well, why?" I said, "Well, there's just too many crazy noises and lights going off and on up there in that courtroom. So we just don't think we want to do this at night anymore. It's just pretty weird in this old courthouse." This courthouse was built in 1871 and 72, exactly 150 years ago at a tremendous cost of $26,500. So these custodians said, well, all right, starting next week, we'll let you come in the daytime. We'll just work around you or let you do weekends or whatever you want. And as they left the final night, crossing the bridge, going back to Lenoir City where they live, they looked back and the lights came on in the upstairs courtroom. And they said, we know we turned those lights out. And is this our final goodbye from whatever's going on in that courthouse up there?
Wow.
So that was they probably broke some speed limits getting back to Lenoir City to their house that night. So that was, and those people never, they did come back and work in the daytime, but with the lights on. But that phenomenon, you can, if you're a non-believer, you can say that, just write it off to old electrical wiring, because it proved to come around more than once. The wiring in the upstairs, the lighting and up on the ceiling of the courtroom in the upstairs courthouse. Somewhere about 15 years ago, in one of the court videos, one of the court reporters actually mentioned this to me. Said there is a figure, a movement on the court cameras, and it's right there at jury seat number 12. And it's, some people say, well, it's just a blip in the film, or it's a speck, it's a bug flying, but it's a movement. And again, to the believers, it is a ghost. To the non-believers, it's something unusual about the film, or the air conditioner came on and caused some debris to blow around, or whatever. And then, of course, in 2019, the courthouse burned. The most common theory of why the courthouse burned was the wiring in the upstairs courtroom. So to a opportunist ghost tour guy, it's Andy Taylor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andy Taylor is behind all this.
He cursed them.
He cursed that place, 140 years ago. He is the one reason that the ghost lawyers were out there saying we got to hang him just today. Let's don't wait until his hanging day. He is the one that caused the craziness with the custodians and the upstairs. He's the figure that was seated at jury seat number 12, and he's the guy that burned the courthouse down. Now, we don't want to make any kind of light of a tragedy that happened to our county courthouse.
Right.
Fortunately,
do they have a date for that to be finished?
yeah, that's
like I haven't
David,
seen him
that's
work
the
on it
magic
for
question.
2 years.
When you work right across the street from that courthouse, you get asked that every day. I did see in the paper that the insurance policy says if we restore it to its original source, and that's the good thing to me, is it will be our courthouse again. The clerk and master and the county court's clerk's office will be in there, and they will have trials again upstairs with good lighting and wiring, I hope. But it will be essentially the way it was. We intend for the time capsules from our 150-year celebration back in 2020 will go in there, along with the relics that were kept from 1970 from the 100-year celebration. And those Pellico Village woodworkers built some wonderful cabinets. We got the old beams, the pine beams that were burned and charred out of there. We saved them, and they built these vaults out of it. So that's a nice throwback to history.
That's cool.
That you got the original beams from 1872, and now they've just completed those cabinets with those old beams and some of the charred stuff on it from the fire here 150 years later. But it will be open. It's just government takes its time, and I did see where the county actually authorized some of their money to stabilize it and put some extra work into it. So courthouse will be back, and we'll be able to tell this story over and over and over.
That's cool.
Now, I mentioned the river and some of the mystique of the Tennessee River that passes by Loudon. And this is not in any of my tours, but it's something I've learned from some of the old timers. Our river, as I said, in the 1850s, our river history was our growth. It was when we were the big wharf town, and the boats would stand there sometimes 2 and 3 days waiting to unload their cargo. All that commercial activity, that agriculture products going up and down the river. 5 hotels, though, with some of them with wealthy people from Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York staying in them, so which supported the steamboat, passenger steamboats, the luxury steamboats that you see in these fancy movies. Well, we had the steamboats in Loudon, and I'm told heard the story from Mr. Joe Harrison. This is the Harrison family that goes back to the 1820s here in Loudon County. They're the agricultural family that not only were in Harrison Bend, right there around just below the river, below Loudon on the river, but also now they're out in the country in Philadelphia in what we know as Piney, with 2 of the biggest dairy farms in the state. One of them being the one where Sweetwater Valley cheese is produced.
Cheese,
yeah, good cheese. But Mr. Harrison told me the story about Uncle Vern Harrison was the last man to pioneer to captain a steamboat from Loudon up the river in the last days of the steamboat legacy. This would have been 1920s or 30s, and he took it right out of Loudon, right out of there on the wharf, up the Tennessee River, then up the Little T at Lenoir City, up the Little Tennessee, and he got up to Vonore. It was spring, and the rains hadn't started yet. So he ran aground, and the boilers blew up, and that steamboat exploded. And Brody Harrison and I think Charles Harrison, who just both passed away in the last few years, were out on the farm there in Fork Creek, and they looked up. They heard the explosion, looked up over the bend, and there was this huge. They didn't know what it was. This huge explosion. Other than they knew that their Uncle Vern had taken the steamboat by an hour or 2 earlier. It had run aground. Well, this was a time when the farmers were trying to get their crops planted, so they didn't have time to go out and take care of that boat or try to drag it or get the valuables. They just had to leave it sitting there. And then because they were so busy planting, well, then the spring rains, the freshets they called it, came, and it washed the boat down the river. Okay? Now hold that thought. We're going to come. Where did that boat go? Where did that steamboat, the last steamboat to go up the river? Nobody ever found it. Now, some say it drifted on down and maybe got lodged in right where the Little T dumps into the Big Tennessee River in Lenoir City. Some say that they saw debris floating down right back in Loudon where it started out in front of the river, and that that's where it would have gotten lodged in that bend. Couldn't have turned. Skip back a few years prior to that, though. There was a steamboat called the General Richard Jackson steamboat, and it had gotten beyond that low ground in Vonore, and had gotten all the way up around what then was known as Morganton, and there was what they know as a fundamentalist Bible thumping congregation having what they know as dinner on the ground on a Sunday afternoon. They were out there celebrating and praying and eating good picnic food, and that steamboat had a calliope sound about it. When they ran that steam whistle, it didn't have the typical steamboat whistle. It sort of had that calliope, and it was a very unique sound. Well, they were around the bend at outside this church having their dinner on the ground. They saw the black steam, and then they heard that calliope sound, and their preacher yelled out, said, "It's the end of ages. That's Gabriel blowing his horn."
Oh no!
And they all got down on the ground and started praying, and of course they kept praying, and after a while that steamboat came around the curve with that whistle on it. They knew it wasn't it. So let's go back to the steamboat that Vern Harrison grounded up there in Vonore, and they never found. People have gone and dived and everything else looking for that steamboat. Well, that's what's weird about the river. The river, I think, is haunted in Loudon. During the Civil War in the 1860s, when the Confederates were giving up the bridge, the valuable railroad bridge that transported, weaponry and troops and everything else. That was a very valuable position. But they finally had to retreat back down to Chattanooga and Chickamauga and whatnot in 1863. So they ran the train off in the river. They burned the bridge so that the Yankee troops couldn't proceed and take advantage and use that bridge. They not only ran the engine off in the river, they ran 48 cars off in the river. Now, that's a lot of stuff to go in the Tennessee River. Wow. And remember, there weren't any dams then, so our river wasn't near as wide or deep as it is now. Right there at the edge of downtown Loudon. And just like that steamboat that floated down the river, people have looked and looked and looked for those 48 railroad cars for 160-something years. And nobody's ever found the first shred of it, the first element of it. And same with the steamboat or those 48 rail cars and that engine that were run off into the river. So some of the people say, well, those haunted trains and steamboat are still just going up and down the river underground, or something weird happened to it. But that's the mystique of the sunken treasure of the Tennessee River outside of Loudon. And I've always wondered about it. But to my knowledge, do your research. Nobody has ever found any piece of evidence of that steamboat or that train that sank into that river. Who knows?
Those are some heavy objects.
Maybe a Loch Ness monster down there eating trains and steamboats. But
Wonder.
That's some. I mean, those train cars and stuff are heavy. That's not. I mean,
where does it go?
That's hundreds of tons a car. You'd think that would hit the mud and just it would sit.
Yeah. So now you guys may research it tonight and find that was all drug out and put in a museum somewhere, but I've never heard it. And the old timers always scratch their heads over it.
All right.
For what it's worth.
That's awesome. And that all happened, way before TVA, because there was no TVA then. So
right.
Wow.
I know you was talking about the Harrisons, the farm, Harrison Bend Road.
Yes.
That goes back. It's right on the river right there.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed, I drive back there a lot, just riding around, but there's some little, like, houses. They look like old cabins.
Before you get to the very end of the road. Yeah, that was, okay, so that was another one of the Harrison family homes, the one that's back there near that duck pond. Mm-hmm. And those there was an old, what they called prison camp up there, and then I don't know if it was slave quarters or not, those little, but definitely some of their tenants, sharecroppers, whatever you call them, did live in those little houses back behind there.
Yeah.
But again, Mr. Joe Harrison he offered to take me back there, and I haven't taken him up on it and tell me about all that. But there were. Somewhere along the line, the Harrisons married into the Simpson family, and Judge Benny Simpson was in the house out at the end of the road, and Miss Annie Laura Simpson, I think, or I've got it wrong, but in the big white house by the pond there, and those houses behind there, it was. I'm sorry, not a prison camp. It was they called it the Poor Farm. Poor Farm, and that's worth. I'll try to find out more about that. And Mr. Joe Harrison was going to take me and show me, but I've heard it referred to as the Poor Farm, and I don't know if just people work there as tenant farmers or what. But it goes back. They've been in that bend, the Harrison family, since the 1820s, and then somewhere along the line they went out and branched out and did more stuff up in out in the country to have bigger farms, but they're all still farming. The Harrisons, through that, the past 200 years in this county, have all either been farmers or doctors. You've had a doctor every generation in that family, and you've had dairy farmers and stuff every generation. But the old Harrison Cemetery is out there in that bend, and it's very unique. There's some names and some history there that's very interesting. I've taken. I had a group from Tellico Village that wanted to do my ghost tour, and they wanted to have dessert afterwards in a cemetery. I'm thinking, well, if I take them out here to Old Steekee, right there on the main road, some cops are going to come by and
what's going on?
it's a heck of a place to go eat brownies and drink lemonade, but that's what they wanted to do. And so I took them up to the Harrison Cemetery, which had to follow me up there. It was out in the boonies, out in the farmland. I knew nobody would see them, but I failed to ask the Harrison family if I could do it. But I took them out there and got them settled, and I started to drive out the gravel road. And here comes, by this time it's 11 o'clock at night or so. And I'm driving out, and here comes a car coming in. I said, "Oh no!" I said, some of these Harrisons, Simpson family, they've got guns, and they've seen a bunch of cars coming in their headlights, and I've messed up. And this guy, I stopped him. I said, "It's my fault. Don't go down there and punish them. It's my fault." And he says, "What are you talking about?" And it was some young guy. I think he was on drugs, and he was lost.
Oh no!
He'd been out there in the Bend partying with some friends. He was from Roane County, from Kingston or somewhere, and he was lost, or he was looking for trouble. One, and he said, "Well," I said, "Well, you don't have any. You're not one of the Harrison family." He said, "No." He said, "I'm lost." I said, "Well, let me lead you back to the highway," and I did. That was pretty scary. I thought I was going to get shot or put in jail.
The house that my wife's parents built out over there by where used to be the old log cabin. That big two-story house
on
that
the
was
highway,
right there.
back Queener.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you take
a white two-story house.
Yep, that big white one at
the corner of the old River Road and Queener, I guess.
Yep.
Okay, that was your
my wife's
family. Okay.
Yep. Her dad and mom built that house.
All right.
So if you go back out to River Road, and you go around the bend like you're coming back towards Loudon, do you know anything about that big, huge two-story house that sits there? I think
on Sweetwater Creek.
Yeah, wasn't it a bed and breakfast at one time? And
yes, it was. That was the Albert Lenoir home, and these are the Lenoirs that started what's now Lenoir City. General William Ballard Lenoir. This is one of his sons, Albert. Two of his sons strayed away from Lenoir City. One was Franklin, who has the home down in Philadelphia that's an old brick home, and it's got the peacocks outside and all that.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the sons that left Lenoir City. And then Albert built that home prior to the Civil War. Albert Lenoir. It's a pretty unique story. I mean, it's a great old house. It's got beautiful stairwells. They had dances and parties there. They had slave quarters out back. And somewhere along the line, he went to Chattanooga and became a developer down there. His children were raised down there. And his daughter, apparently, but her dad came back and stayed at that old home after he had retired from his career in Chattanooga. Well, the daughter thought maybe she was a little too uppity for Loudon. The story is she removed the family graves from behind that house and took them back down to Chattanooga. But that was the Albert Lenoir house, and it's a beautiful house inside and out. And yes, it was a bed and breakfast at one time. It had been a couple of the Loudon policemen had gotten to be friends of the family in Knoxville that owned it, but they were absentee owners, and they were taking care of it. You guys would know who I'm talking about. I won't mention them, but they were taking great care of that. It was at some point known as the Butler home. You know where Butler Drive is? The Butler family owned it long after the Lenoirs had it. And then the current day owners have finally, the fourth or fifth people to own it have moved in and are taking good care of it from what I hear. But yeah, it has quite a story to it, and I'm sure their walls could talk.
It's a very haunted place too.
Is that right? Well, I'm not surprised because
I worked with the lady before, and her brother was one of those police officers that would come by nightly and check on the place. There was 3 occasions where lights were on in the place. He was hearing music playing and would call for backup. They would go into the place and it was completely empty.
Oh my!
And that happened on 3 occasions. She told me about that, and I heard that the slave quarters that are out back, they heard all kinds of stuff out of those too.
That's why. Well, I'm not surprised. That house, it's got some history to it.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that, but I know the officers you're talking about. I wish they'd told me that.
Yes.
I'm glad you told me.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was one of them's sister that told me, that he had told her.
Well, the whole time those guys were, that makes sense. And the house was unoccupied all those years.
Yeah.
Except by the unusual inhabitants that you just mentioned.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, music, lights on, everything. I mean, just crazy. I mean, and to get a police officer to call in for backup to come in for something, I mean, something's got to be going on.
Yep.
And so I found the stories pretty impressive.
Sweetwater Creek, there's if you followed it from the mouth of the river down there all the way back, I'd say there's a lot of old homes that had some unusual happenstances.
Yes.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of fishing right there at that house under that bridge.
Yeah.
Caught a lot of fish.
Well, I'm glad you told me that. I will. We'll have to include that in as you say, the lore.
I would. Yeah. I mean, that's that's some pretty good lore as far as I mean, when you have police officers that can say this did happen,
It's an antebellum home.
Yeah.
It's definitely an antebellum.
Me and the wife was interested in buying it before we bought this place, but the guy was wanting like $800,000 for it. And we're like, nah. And what makes me mad, though, is that someone had also actually inquired, and the people were like, no, that's too much. We were only looking to spend $250,000, but thank you. And so they left. Well, from what we were told, and that's the guy that that told me the story about that, where you bought your car.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, no, the guy called them back a month later and said that I'll sell it to you for $250,000. And I'm saying,
there's no way they got $800 for that.
I'm sitting here going, are you kidding me?
I bet they could now.
Oh, yeah.
Today's, yeah. But me and the wife wanted that because we were not only wanting to live there, but we was wanting to turn it into back into a bed and breakfast, but also into a haunted bed and breakfast. Because I'm sure we could find stuff while we were there. And we've stayed at plenty of haunted bed and breakfasts, and you're talking $150 a night.
Really?
Easy. Yeah. And not always catch stuff, but and how that place was or how it sounded like it was pretty active. So, I think it would have made a pretty good.
I would say so.
Yeah. I would have loved every minute of it.
I've heard of these haunted hotels you can stay at all around the South and whatnot, and end up in New England. And I always wanted to do that.
Yeah, me and the wife have been to a few.
My wife wouldn't do it.
No,
she wouldn't go for it.
My wife loves me enough. She does those things for me. She knows that's my interest. So she's like, all right.
I wanted.
Yeah,
but then you see her sage and everything when everything's done.
She'll sage it. She'll sage the whole house every month or so.
Educate me and your listeners. What's sage?
So sage is what sage plant is.
Yeah.
So you dry it out, and the Native Americans use it a lot. And you could go through and sage a home. You start in the back of the home and work your way out. Open your doors, your windows, so it gives the spirits a place to go.
Oh.
But it literally drives the spirits and stuff out of your house. Yeah. Yep.
Sage.
Yep.
And you're
dried
saying
sage.
The Indians did that.
Yes. Yeah. It comes from the Native Americans. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
It's like a blessing.
Yeah.
It's like doing a blessing on your home, and it's a cleansing. They call it a cleansing and stuff. So it'll drive anything, even negatives, just negative stuff, not even just spirits, but negative energies and stuff like that. It gets rid of it all. And it's really funny because maybe it's because I'm a little sensitive to those kind of things, but I can tell when she's done it. I could come home and the house is just fresh. It's crazy, but you can tell.
It's like a verb, saging or sage. What did you call it?
Yep, saging the house. Yep. Yeah.
Learn something.
Yeah.
Well, as you speak of the Native Americans, and on our cemetery tour, because the Steekee Village was in the corner of that old Steekee Cemetery, is where the original village was. It's 50 yards from Steekee Creek, and that was a big thing with the Cherokees, what they call going to water. And even in the coldest day of the year, in the morning or something, a lot of the Cherokee young men would go out and just jump in the water, no matter how cold it was.
I call it morning coffee.
Morning coffee.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. It cleansed them
Yes.
of impurities. It definitely built up their resistance, and it probably wasn't a bad idea if you had the bravery to do it. But going to water was, and of course they had a really major relationship with streams, and all their villages were along those streams. But I like that as part of our Steekee experience. The other, Jason, when you go back to the Andrew Taylor, the final legal hanging that we do at our cemetery tour, is we're on the banks of the Steekee Creek, where within 7 years of that 1883 final legal hanging in this area, there were 2 illegal lynchings that took place. And that's part of our Steekee moonlight cemetery tour. We observed the area on Steekee Creek where the hanging tree was, where 2 illegal lynchings took place within 7 years, so in the 1880s and early 1890s, and some very gruesome murders that occurred. And when that happened, the people sort of did their own justice. You didn't have time to go through the court of law, and that's where I won't get into the details unless you want me to, but that's where on our tour we definitely talk about the hanging tree and 2 of the most brutal murders that happened around Loudon, but also the lynchings that took place afterwards.
Wow.
Those were tough, rough times. I mean, if you think about the 1880s, I think those were the days of Billy the Kid out west, and the Desperados, and some of the, it was a pretty brutal era, both for the Andy Taylors of the world and the Desperados out west, and these lynchings. You can't imagine the murders that would happen back then, much less ripping a guy out of the jail bars and hanging him on a sycamore tree on Steekee Creek before the law could do anything about it. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And the thing was, we didn't have Highway 11. The Steekee Road that's there today was the main thoroughfare. It was the road from Knoxville and the Loudon Ferry, the Blair Ferry, all the way to Chattanooga. And the second lynching that happened there around 1890, this guy, Henry Clay Foster, had murdered his stepson with a big axe in the back of the head. That's awful.
Oh.
And they ripped him out of the jail bars before anybody could do anything, took him out there and hung him on the same tree that the previous lynching had taken place on, but they left his body hanging. John Napier, who's a history teacher at Loudon High and is the president of the Loudon County Historical Society, did a lot of research on this. And some of the people he interviewed said that they let that body hang there on that sycamore tree for about 2 or 3 days, just so that people passing in to town on the main road would see what happens to a vile, horrible person that would murder a little boy with an axe.
Wow.
Pretty gruesome.
That is.
And I have to be careful. I got out there and forgot that I wasn't taking a bunch of Tellico villagers or local friends, and I had some little kids, and I started into that story. I said, wait a minute. They don't need to hear this, They don't need to hear this. So I try to watch it now.
I know some of my heritage is Cherokee.
Okay.
So my dad's dad was full-blooded Cherokee Indian.
Full-blooded.
Yeah. Yeah, from North Carolina. So the old blood. And so there's a lot of stories, in this whole area.
Spiritual, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've wanted to know more about the especially the early days, everything, but they were Cherokee specifically, right?
Yep.
But everything I've read is that the Cherokees were far more developed.
They were part of the 5 civilized tribes, is what they called them, civilized tribes.
They didn't live in teepees and
no, they lived in houses. Some owned slaves. They had the written language, which you could all go out here to, Sequoia National Birthplace and Museum, which they renovated. It's a beautiful place, and find out. But they had a written language. They had newspapers that were delivered every day, and these are the things that kind of led them to the Trail of Tears. People were jealous of what they had, but when the Trail of Tears happened, 2,000 broke off and came back to the mountains. And because they didn't go there, it wasn't until the 1920s. It's the Baker Rolls is what it's called. The 1920s was back when they actually made the ones in the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians back into. They actually said, "Okay, you are Indians," but because they weren't living on the reservation, they wouldn't recognize them as Cherokee Indians.
And where were your?
Here, my grandfather and them came from the Cherokee in North Carolina.
They were in North Carolina.
Yep. Yeah.
I had understood that when they were rounding them up over there, that some of them just escaped into the mountains.
They did.
Hid till the Trail of Tears passed on.
Yep, there's over 2,000 of them that didn't make the journey, or somewhere along the journey, turned back around and said, "Heck with this," and didn't make the journey. Yep, sure was.
Are you close enough that you can get any money out of those casinos?
That's
a tacky question.
My from my grandfather. So my father, or none of them were registered.
Yeah.
I have looked on the Baker Rolls and have found some of my relatives, and that's all you have to do to prove that you are who you are.
Right.
So I could go up there, but to receive any money, this is part of the ingenious plans that our government does to people. The only way you get money is to live on the reservation. So you got to be bonded. You got to stay in the jail before you could get any money.
What about that?
Yeah.
Well, I've that's another one of my passions is the Little Tennessee River, and the of course in particular the fight over the Tellico Dam, and it's sort of a tacky, politically incorrect, but some of the newspapers actually said back the first ones to really oppose that dam were the trout fishermen, and then the archaeologists, and then the history people. But most importantly, the biggest group were the farmers that had that land. And a lot of them poor farmers that didn't really have that weren't on the river, but for some reason they were taking their land away from the river. They may have had 60 acres or something. And then the Cherokees came in late. And I'd read, this was a very politically, the Knoxville paper said they were a little bit late coming to the powwow, which was very poor taste to say that. But the Cherokees didn't come till late. And when they did, apparently the ones from the Eastern Band, from the leadership, were more opposed to the archaeologists digging up their stuff than they were.
They've got it where all that stuff's supposed to be reinterred now.
Really?
Yeah. They passed laws on it now. You can't go in, or if you get caught digging in, some pretty bad things that happen nowadays.
Right.
And if they're giving permission to do it, once they're done, it all has to be reinterred back right where they found it.
I'm just very intrigued with all of that along the Little T. Of course, the villages, what little civil, Native American there was out here in Loudon County was limited.
Quite a bit from here to Chattanooga. Quite a bit.
Down Hiawassee.
Yeah, all the way back down. I have a book. I don't know if it's over there, by Bill Landry, and it talks about this area. And I think the name of the book's like when Loudon was the West, or something like that. Because where Fort Loudon was the furthest west expansion
at one time.
And anything further than that was the Wild West. And then you had the Cherokee Indians that were all up and down through here. And the book talks about where all their villages were and everything like that. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's neat. Well, we've gotten away from
we're on
the
history.
subject, but that's intriguing. You can teach me something.
Yeah.
What else?
Hey, it's history.
Yeah. I will, if I could do Jason, a shameless plug,
Do it. Yes.
I will say that on the tours we do, don't have a schedule posted at this time, but I will say that if it's okay to mention Bo Carey History Tours, we do have a website and a Facebook page. The website, which I haven't been using, but it's actually BoCareyHistoryTours.weebly.com, WEEBLY, and my email address is bocarey95@gmail.com. But people can call me at work if they want to know when there's a tour. I do like something that seems to be more what we do lately. Any group of 6 people or more can have their own tour. They can pick the time. They can day or night. A lot of folks that don't want to be out too far after dark, I'll do it in the daytime if they want to. But 6 people or more, I'll let them pick the time. Most of the tours are 90 minutes, hour and a half. We're looking so in addition to the cemetery tour, the ghost tour, and the daytime history tour, we're working on a food tour of downtown Loudon. Don't know if that'll be ready until fall. There's a new, there's talk of a new craft beer place up at the old depot, and it's scheduled to come in the fall, and that would give us downtown Loudon probably 4 or 5 different restaurants or taverns that we could do. And I'm thinking about either a food tour or a food history tour or a pub crawl, a ghost tour. And so that's in the works. If people can let me know whether they want us to pursue that further or not.
That'd be awesome.
Glad it's a walking tour, not a driving tour.
Right.
And so those are in the works. We do have a home tour. You mentioned it. I'd forgotten, hadn't done it in a while, but it's about 15 homes around the downtown that are all at least 100 years old. We usually go in about one of them. The one that, have I used too much time?
Nope.
The one that has, once again, the real stories from, I'm one of these people, I like to hear a story from at least 2 people, like the Path Killer thing. After the people from ARP Grocery told it, some of the locals that live there said they'd observed it. So that meant a lot to me. Well, there's a home, it's the house if you're going up Mulberry Street, up Highway 11 in Loudon. As you go up the hill past the first red light from the river, there's the Methodist church there on the left. Across from it is a house built in the 1880s by I.J. Barron. So it's, 140 years old. And beautiful old home. But it is where reportedly the first radio broadcast was listened to when the Simpson family lived there. And some of the well-to-do people all came together to hear the first broadcast of a radio heard in Loudon. Well, some of the locals that maybe weren't let's don't say as educated, but just didn't understand what was going on, thought that was a little bit too progressive. That's almost like it's satanic or something for a man's voice to be coming through a wire. And here we are doing it tonight, and
right
to the world. But,
we're going to the world.
But they thought that was just evil. That's something that a man's voice could be coming through a wire in the wall of that nice old house. Now, whether they, quote, threw a curse on that house or not, we don't know. What we do know is that 2 different families that lived there in the late 50s, early 60s, and on up into the early 70s have reported some very odd behavior in that house. The first that happened was that, and again, it perhaps goes back to the sound through the wire, but right there while they were sitting there in the parlor, the stereo, the needle just jumped over. Right, stereo was not on. Needle jumps over and starts playing a record.
Wow.
And it happened again. And the family's all sitting there flabbergasted. How did this happen? Well, and I actually called one of the residents, won't mention a name, that lived there back in the 60s. And I said, can you remember any of this stuff? He said, well, I know that, we'd be in there playing, and the door closest to the on the west side of the house. Sort of, you come through the kitchen there, just somebody going crazy knocking on the door. And we go to the door, nobody'd be there. And said my aunt was over there visiting my mother one day, and again, just something like somebody trying to knock the door down, like there was an emergency. And she went up. She was older in her years, and she'd finally got to the door. Nobody there. This happened 2 or 3 times. And then finally, another lady that had lived there at a different time, and she told me this herself, said, yeah, and this is a good God-fearing woman that, you know, lived in Loudon 85 years, said, I called home one day at lunch to see if my husband was home for lunch, to tell him where he could get some food out of the icebox. And I didn't know if he'd come home or not from work, but I've called, and somebody picked up the phone, and I said, she called her husband's name, said, is that you? Nothing, just breathing. She said, is that you? Answer. Hung up the phone, called back, same thing, just breathing, but on the other end. And she said, and here we go, and we're going through a wire now, a cord of electronics. And she said, that night, I said, you were home and messing with me, weren't you? You wouldn't answer the phone. He said, I didn't go home for lunch. I ate down at the diner. And she and her husband are the only ones that had a key to the house. So she said that was pretty odd. So that one house, whether it goes back to the original radio broadcast or not, there has been numerous. The guy that I mentioned earlier that kept hearing the door knocking, he said there were 4 or 5 bizarre things happen in that house. And he said, we've lived in 7 or 8 houses in our lives, and never that house had 4 or 5 just crazy things happen. So we've got a good bona fide haunted house, and that's that's the first house we visit on our home tour of Loudon, including the antebellum Mason house, where Thomas Jefferson Mason, the old steamboat captain, his home was, started building it before the Civil War in brick home. Now, this is the house up on Commerce Street at the corner of Huff's Ferry and Commerce, overlooking the railroad, and this is where the McQueen family ended up living for a century and a half. But right at the onset of the war, the Union troops stole all the bricks to go up on Fort Hill and build the forts to oversee the railroad bridge. And even though Thomas Jefferson Mason was a Union sympathizer, he wasn't too happy about it. And supposedly the guy that built it, who was not a Union sympathizer, when he finally built it back, and it's a wood house to this day, the bricks never made it back, it's a wood house, and he built the Stars and Bars, the old Confederate flag insignia. You can see it today on the upstairs balcony. So when you drive by there, look up there, and you'll see the old Confederate Stars and Bars as sort of an up yours to the Union troops that stole his bricks. Anyway, that's our home tour, and we do it. Ladies like to do that. So anyway, it's great being able to share Loudon history and also the unique stories and the lore, as you say, with folks. And yesterday, I had a group of 16 ladies. I may have mentioned this earlier, from Knoxville, and so the word's getting out.
That's awesome.
They're not just from Farragut or something. They're from out Powell, the other end of town, and somehow they'd heard about it, and so they came and they ate at lunch at the Carmichael Inn and seemed to enjoy it. Some of them were on walkers, and so we had to sort of shorten the meeting.
Right.
I'm looking for, if you visited Chattanooga or Nashville, you'll see these. I think it's an excuse for a party. They've got kegs on these vehicles, and everybody's pedaling.
Yes.
I'm not sure I want to make it into a traveling bar. I don't know if the good policemen here in Loudon want that, but I would love to have some kind of an open air vehicle to take people, especially folks that have a difficulty walking. So I'm on the lookout for one of those. I went down to Chattanooga for their Christmas parade. I play the Grinch, believe it or not. I dress up as the Grinch every year at the Chattanooga
Really?
Christmas parade.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's a lot of fun, and kids love it. And but they have those paddle wheel vehicles. So I'm trying to buy a used one. or something that we could do for driving tours in the downtown.
That's neat.
Might be fun, We'll see.
Yeah, that's neat. Huh.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out for me.
I will.
Somebody out there listening may know of one that we could acquire,
Yeah, that's cool.
or an old trolley car or whatever.
Yeah, that would be neat.
Horse
I
and-
could see that.
Horse and buggy.
Horse and buggy.
Horse and buggy.
Then
Who's going to be good at cleaning up? That's what I was going to say.
Well, they've got those bags you can put on.
We shall see.
We'll bag it.
Take it back to the horse and buggy.
That they talk about trigger objects, and I would wonder if a horse and buggy would trigger some things, especially if you went up to where you said the Ford dealership place and stuff was, where he decided, where he got out of the business and all that stuff.
Yeah.
If something like that wouldn't trigger something to happen in that area,
You would think.
Yeah.
Very well could be.
Yeah. Yeah, they call a lot of that stuff trigger objects, where you can bring something from a time period, and sometimes it'll trigger things to start happening.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so just to let you know, you could do stuff like that while you're doing your tours and stuff. Bring trigger objects and set them down and stuff. And
I'll try it.
yeah,
Why not?
Yeah,
Why not?
and like I said, tell people take a lot of pictures. If you catch something, tag me in it.
Thank you. That's my tip of the night. I'm going to do that.
Tag me in it, and that's a lot of the tours that I've taken. They encourage it, right? They encourage you to share them on Facebook and all that stuff. Take as many pictures as you want, and but if you catch something, just tag me in it, and then they'll use it in their tour when they find stuff.
Well, this is not the trigger you're talking about, but you guys took my ghost tour. Did we have Elvis that night?
Yes, we did.
Well,
We did. It was awesome.
One night Elvis did. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, we are the only ghost tour maybe in the world that has the Ghost of Elvis show up, and in downtown Loudon. Well, this particular night, Elvis had sung "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and as soon as he got into it, and we had some folks from Rarity Bay, some pretty sophisticated people. They didn't expect to see Elvis on the tour, but then this dog across the street started barking, and he wouldn't stop. On Hound Dog, and he barked throughout. I mean, I couldn't. We triggered that dog. Okay?
You did,
and he wouldn't stop. And then after we walked away, people were just cracking up. And in a little bit more eerie, serious note, at the cemetery one night, on the moonlight, it was the full moon. And the darn moon wouldn't come up over the trees. I was wanting to have the effect. And finally, just towards the end of the tour, and the full moon peeked up over the trees. And I yelled out, "There it is!" Well, it triggered the dog next door in the farmhouse, who just started howling.
Oh.
And then the more he howled, the more it sort of sounded like a wolf. And so it added to the mystique and
that's
and
awesome.
the atmosphere. But that's not the trigger you're talking. You're talking about a real trigger.
Real trigger, yeah.
Okay. So anything from the time period, or
Yeah, a lot of times they'll bring stuff if they're going into a place that's from the 1800s or just whatever, or they've had like people hearing music, like a piano playing or just different things. They'll bring trigger objects of those kinds, like books of music.
intentionally bringing it.
Yeah, books of music and stuff like that, and bring it in and see. And a lot of times they could catch on EVPs and different stuff. They could catch, music playing in the background.
Were you guys the one that told me, or was it maybe the folks at the Carmichael Inn, that over there on the tavern side, maybe they had the music came on and they turned it off? Did you tell me that?
I think it was.
And they heard a voice say,
"Yeah, turn it on or leave it alone or something like that." Yeah,
leave it on.
Yep.
And I thought, now that,
Yeah.
if I'd been there when that happened, I think I'd have been running. That's
I've been
pretty,
like, let's go.
pretty scary. Yeah, leave it on.
Yeah, let's leave it on.
That's I've really that particular, and again I like to distinguish between the Carmichael Tavern in the brick building and the Carmichael Inn, the log building, because there's definitely two different structures, and I think the the stories go both ways, but probably we've come a long way. When I first started doing the ghost tour, when I was actually getting the lady that lived in the apartment upstairs she had a key, of course, and she would sneak inside and make some noise in there when I took people by. It was all a setup. It was horrible. And here I am, a descendant of those Carmichaels that built that, and I didn't know any of these stories. So you guys have done me a favor, and then of course Sean and others have shared the stories, and then the chef that I knew that was pushed. So we went from me creating mystique to real stories that have some punch to them. So
Yeah.
that's why I like to start the tours there in one of the two buildings, because they have uniquely different history stories.
Right.
And then finish there, and the ladies often like to have their lunch there, or if it's at night, maybe have some some beverages at the tavern side or whatever. And so it's a nice round trip to start on one building and finish on the other. And it's cool that I want to thank you both for helping me know some of the stories that are in each building that can be shared. It's a nice start and finish, and especially when they can sit down and outside in the chairs at the end when they're tired of walking for an hour and a half.
Yeah, I just think it's awesome that you're doing what you're doing, and we get to be a little bit of a part of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Well,
It's just awesome.
I want you guys to keep doing this.
Yes,
We've been doing it
I'll
for
promote
12
you
years.
That's great. That's great, and you like it, don't you?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
it's fun.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great.
I just wish we hadn't had technical difficulties at
the
first
beginning.
here.
Yeah,
It happens.
dealing with computers and stuff, programs, glitches in the matrix.
But I'll have it fixed up when we do the
When we podcast it,
when we podcast it out.
got a new message. Someone on there's talking. It's on Podbean. These guys are just David and Jason there.
Yeah,
Just being quiet.
everybody else. Well, we got
Everybody else left us.
Martin's still in there.
Martin's still in there. Hey, Martin, how you doing?
Oh, well, you want to add anything?
No, I've rattled on too long. I think.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't.
Anything new coming down?
Well,
Yes.
like I said, it's sort of in the works for to do the at least a food
That
tour.
would be good.
And we're hoping, that seashell museum there on Wharf Street was where the Quinn Funeral Home was for so many years. It was a funeral home for 80 years or so, from 1930s to 1830s, all the way up to it was more than that. All the way up until a couple of years ago.
Wow.
It's now the largest possibly the largest public seashell museum in the country, because Dr. Stimpson has been collecting these rare and expensive seashells for 50 years now. I always tell people that's not what everybody. If you had a choice of what to do on a Friday night, you might not be looking at seashells. But a lot of these folks that have grandchildren, I like to say, well, if they're visiting from out of town, that first night you get to know them, first day, but third or fourth day they may be getting a little restless. That'd be a good place to go get a science project for their school or something. But it is a unique thing to see. Now, why do I mention that? On paranormal experience. Well, of course, that one of the stories in our history tour is that is where the Bush Brazil unique live funeral occurred when they came in the 1930s. The old man from out in Cave Creek with the beard down to his belly and riding his old mule wanted to witness his own funeral, because he had supposedly murdered a constable out there in Cave Creek over a Civil War grudge. He let the mule live in his house instead of putting him in the barn. He was a weird dude, and all the kids referred to him as the boogeyman. And so he wanted to see what people would really say about him. So he paid the undertakers to have his funeral live out at Cave Creek Cemetery. As the story goes, when they got there were over 8,000 people waiting because the word got out it was a huge event. And the preachers said nice things about him, and he went home. And a couple of years later, when he actually died, there were only 4 people there. But at that particular, it was featured on the Heartland series with Bill Landry, the Frank Robinson, the assistant undertaker that drove Mr. Bush Brazil in the hearse to the live funeral, shared that and featured it on Heartland series on WBIR. Well, his granddaughter, his boyfriend, had tried his luck at Hollywood production, and he heard that story over and over about Uncle Bush Brazil's live funeral. Long story short, he went out and spun the story to his Hollywood buddies that were still in production. They wrote a movie, a screenplay. They wrote the movie, called it Get Low. It's a low-budget film, filmed in North Georgia, but it's about Frank Quinn and that funeral home right there in downtown Loudon, which is now the Seashell Museum. As I said, a low-budget film. A lot of people haven't heard about it, but the star power is phenomenal. Bush Brazil is played by Robert Duvall. Frank Quinn, the Undertaker, is played by Bill Murray. Sissy Spacek plays the role of the love interest that Hollywood just totally embellished. And then the Frank Robinson figure that preserved the story and promoted it, and he was a big influence on my life before he died, was played by Lucas Black, who was in the movie Billy Bob Thornton's Swing Blade. He was the little boy. Mm-hmm. And to this day, Lucas Black is on New Orleans NCIS. He's got the guy with the southern accent. So that's a lot of star power for a movie about Loudon. Wow. That sort of puts us on the map, the way I see it. Mm-hmm. So what we're you asked, I took 5 minutes to answer your question. Anything coming up? We're hoping to show the movie Get Low up at the old Loudon Theater there. Wow. What a lot of us know as the Lyric, and they now call it the Historic. Show the movie there. Possibly have some event at the Seashell Museum to tie it in, and do something. It's an easy walking distance between the two places, and so I'm hoping to do that this fall sometime, maybe closer to Halloween or something. So that's one for sure we hope to do. We've got. We're going to do. I'm going to try to upgrade the. Get a better schedule out on the tours we're doing. Trying to hoping that we might do something more around the holidays when people are coming in from out of town. That seems to be a common thread. I get calls from people that say, "Well, I got kin folks coming in from California or from Wartburg. It doesn't matter where they're coming from, but they're only going to be here 3 days." And so I'm hoping to have something where if around the holidays when people tend to have company, that we can definitely gear some things that the whole family can come do, something like that. So, yeah, that's about it. I'm this is at my age. This is good exercise. Taking walking.
You're
tours.
right.
Sounds like you're a real busy man,
and it gets me away from the store. And I hope this is not. I'm married to a Cuban lady, and sometimes Cuban people are a little high strung.
Yes.
And they can be, if you think of Ricky Ricardo, they can be a little, Latins can sometimes be a little jealous or a little suspicious. And one day I'd forgotten to tell her, she usually comes in at our store a little later in the morning. Forgot to tell her I had a group from Tellico Village. And in Tellico Village, there's every kind of club and women's organization you can imagine. So I was sitting them there and getting ready to take off on our tour, and I said, "Man, what are you all called?" I said, "We do something once a month together around East Tennessee, and we're the Women Having Outrageous Regional Experiences WHORE.
Oh, no.
Well, so took them out there on Grove Street. And I said, that's funny. And their husbands have their own little group, and that acronym comes out to PIMPS.
That's hilarious.
They weren't there that day. But, so I'm walking around the corner. My wife sees me walking with a dozen women up the street, and she said, well, what are you doing? You didn't tell me you were leaving the store. What are you doing? I said, don't worry, I'm just taking these whores around town to see everything. What? What did you call them? And of course, the ladies are cracking up. I hope the censors don't get us, Jason.
No, that's funny. I love it. That's hilarious.
I'm told.
Oh, my goodness.
You got to have a laugh every once in a while. This is the most bizarre. Have I shared with you about the first ghost tour I ever did? Like I said, I've been doing history tours for all this time, but I've been gathering the stories from these old timers and whatnot. And Rachel Harrell, she was Rachel Baker then, but she's married to Mark Harrell now, our recreation director. But Rachel was the director of the Loudon County Tourism Bureau, so that's her job, is to promote things that are going on that attract people to commerce in Loudon County. And they had actually gotten some money approved for me to do a self-guided walking tour brochure of downtown Loudon, self-guided walking history tour. And that's what got me started doing the history tour. I was researching it, walking around town doing it, taking people, but I just procrastinated and never got the brochure done. And then I started telling Rachel, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to, because I've waited so long and your money's tied up in this, I'm going to actually add a ghost tour, I think. I've never done it, but I'm going to do it. And she said, well, he's procrastinated now for 3 years on the history tour brochure. Maybe I can bump him along. So she said, how about Halloween Eve and Halloween night? You do your first inaugural ghost tour, free to the public. And now this has been a few years ago, guys. And I said, all right, I'll try it. And we'll meet at the courthouse. And they said, we'll put it on Facebook. I said, well, are you going to promote it? I said, we'll put it on Facebook. Now, this is what an old goober I am. I said, well, that's not going to do any good. That's not going to bring anybody. And so I ate supper and drifted on down to the courthouse. This is the night before Halloween, guys. There were 244 people at the courthouse lawn.
Woo.
Following night, there were 258. So in 2 nights, over 500 people. And we started out, you've done it up the highway towards the old, where the general store Antiques is now, up the hill to that first stop where the old Cox Cafe was, where it had the fire and all the one-armed bandits and everything. And I got up there and looked down the street, and there were 250 people out in the highway, spread out all over the place. I said, oh, my God. And here comes a police cruiser, blue lights. I said, oh, I'm going to jail. I've started a riot. I said, this is awful. I have, and they brought me a megaphone to yell. And fortunately, it was I won't mention names, but the police officer was running for sheriff, and he said, hey, Bo, you need a police escort? I said, I think we do. But after 500 people in 2 nights, and my daughter said, Dad, if you're going to start doing this, it's going to take away from work. You got to start charging. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I wasn't into any of this stuff with ghosts. I'm just a history nut. And that's where the ghost tour thing started, and it escalated, of course, and people, you find out how much people love it. And people like you guys, promote this type of thing, and so it's been a lot of fun. And I try to make it, that the ghost tour at night, the history tour at the daytime, they follow. That's what I am working on, is trying to make them different. And because if anybody a year ago took the daytime history tour, and then they came back 2 months later with their family to do the ghost tour, they've been hitting the same places, and that's not fair. So we've sort of started to develop a whole different map and tried to separate out because there's for instance, the Seashell Museum, the Bush Brazil funeral story. Really doesn't have any ghost element to it. So I put that on the history tour and the things that have some ghost elements to the other. So that's, but there's a thing, and it's, I hope I can say this, for years, my good friends, my local Loudon people that I've grown up around didn't really care that much about the history tours. The people that were intrigued with it were newcomers in Tellico Village, retirees from up north or wherever. And I was amazed how much they want to know about their new home, but they have no roots here, but they are interested. And they continue to be a very big element. I do a history lecture once a year to the Tellico Village Newcomers Club, if you've been there less than 2 years. And then they feed me tours, I bet a dozen tours a year, which is great.
Wow.
But for the cemetery tour, we meet out at, Blairland Church parking lot. And so I said, okay, the first time they were going to do the cemetery tour, I said, well, it's a full moon cemetery tour. They said, well, what time, Bo, do you typically start? I said, let's do it at 8:30. I said, 8:30? Have you never heard of Tellico Midnight? Have y'all ever heard of that? Tellico Midnight basically means they don't want to be out after dark. And they early to bed, early to rise. They may have a golf game the next morning early, and they don't. They said Tellico Midnight. Said let's do it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, well, we're not going to have a full moon at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So nevertheless, I do what they want, and so that's how I learned about Tellico Midnight.
Wow.
And it's give and take. Sometimes they'll go ahead and wait till dark for the ghost tour, the cemetery tour, but in many cases, I have to do it in broad daylight, and that's okay. It's okay. You do what you got to do.
That's it. Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
That's but that's all I got.
That's been great.
Yeah, I'll keep you updated as we change things and do something different.
Jason, when we put him on our website, did we put his web address and all that stuff?
Yeah,
so
it's in the
all the contact stuff's on here if you need it. But
yes,
I don't.
And I think on our website, so on Paranormal 411.
Well, thank you.
Under our guests list, we always keep all of our past guests and stuff. So anybody that didn't get it, and I want you to maybe say it one more time before we get off. But you could also go on there and click on Bo Carey, and it should have his website and all that stuff also should be listed there too. Wow. So you could go there and also catch all of this too.
That's cool. I know we when I went to that Franklin tour, y'all have been probably the most awkward thing on all these tours is sitting there collecting money at the beginning and making change, and it doesn't look good, and it's awkward. It takes time, and you never know whether you're cheating. So in the dark, I've taken people's money and and not giving them change back, and some of them been nice enough, and they get home and say, I didn't do that much. I know I try to leave the ghost of Elvis a tip as we leave. And one night, his niece that plays the music chased me down clear over there at the storehouse and said, "Oh, I said, did you mean to give us $100 bill?" I said, "No, definitely not." So my eyesight's going bad. But what I'm saying is, we've gone on something called Fair Harbor, and it's much better. When I went to this Franklin tour, my daughter and I were probably the last ones there, and the tour guide looks up and says, "Well, you must be Bo and Rachel." I said, "How'd you know that?" He said, "Well, I've got my list. Everybody already paid by credit card."
Yeah.
So you go on. That's what we've gone to is on Fair Harbor, and it's $15. I mean, a lot of these tours are $20, $25, $30. But it's $15, and they get a little cut of that. But the good way is that they'll promote it, and I'm not announcing that tonight, but that's by June 1st when we announce our schedule for the rest of the summer. Everybody that goes on my scheduled tours can simply that's the way it'll work. They just if they're willing to do it, they can go on there and reserve and pay in advance, and they still have a rain option to refund or reschedule. And so that's a new technology that we'll be incorporating to avoid the awkward collection of cash at the beginning of the the good thing about the private groups is that they'll usually just get together and have it there in advance. But I do work with charities. I try to donate as many tours as I can to good causes through the years. And course of the year, the new we did for the Our Place, the new Alzheimer's daycare unit out at the edge of Steekee Village. Donated one of each tour, and they bid it out in an auction and make some good money for the cause, and now I gotta pay them back and take them on the free tour. But it's a good thing. So I'm always I'll say that out loud. I'm glad to work with charities for donations and just donate a tour for a group. But it's definitely a great way for a family or a group of friends if to just schedule it their way. I prefer to do that and I'll work with any group to do something like that. So I just really appreciate you fellas promoting it, and I'm really glad that our community has 12 years. I didn't know you've been doing it this long.
Yeah.
12 years.
That's super.
We took a little break.
Yeah.
Not much, but
yeah.
That's I hope you continue and get more and more successful.
Well, thanks.
Thanks.
It's when we get good guests like you on that. It boosts us.
Maybe I can recommend some others.
Yeah, maybe Loudon will know who we are now.
I'll do all I can to promote you.
We might get in the parade.
Yeah. Well, did you see a couple of years ago, it's the Christmas parade, there's a Ghostbusters
group from Sweetwater.
Sweetwater Paranormal, I think.
I just assumed they were out of Knoxville.
Yeah, Sweetwater Paranormal, I think.
And they had the car and the uniforms.
Oh, no, I didn't see that one.
No, they had the car like on the movie Ghostbusters.
Really?
And they had the uniforms and their backpacks.
That's awesome.
They were walking down the street and just it was hilarious. So what is in Sweetwater?
Sweetwater Paranormal, isn't that what it's called? Yeah. They've been in a couple parades. I've seen them in a couple of the parades, but now it's nothing that lavish.
Are they dressed up or what?
No, they just they drive their vehicle and they tow a trailer like mine.
They're actual ghost hunting.
They actually
group.
really ghost hunt.
They do.
Yeah, and it's plastered on the side of their trailer, Sweetwater Paranormal and all that stuff. Yeah.
And you all are in touch with them.
Now,
we're doing, what is that called? We didn't get invited last year because they didn't know we existed, but Screamfest. So it's out in Athens
at the Klieg Mansion.
The Klieg Mansion.
Well, it's the Klieg House.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of history.
It's haunted and everything, but they've kind of turned it into an attraction where it's like a haunted house too. So
it's right off Highway 11.
Yeah.
And right as you go into Athens.
So they have a big thing every year, and we've got a booth there this year. But they have people from all in this area that do all kinds of paranormal and different things like that come in. Bigfoot, the East Tennessee Bigfoot guy, a good friend of ours, he goes there and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, they have some guest speakers that speak and stuff. It's good, nice little thing.
Sounds like you all know how to promote yourselves.
We try. Just a little bit.
And we do have a video on YouTube where me and David done an investigation about a month ago.
Yeah, here in Loudon.
Not
far from downtown, actually.
Huh.
Not too far.
And then there's a video on it.
Yeah.
Yep. It's on YouTube.
I made it's not the whole thing. I just put it together, but it's okay. It's not professional.
I keep saying, you just made me think of something. I keep saying I don't have anything else to say, but now I do. That's a challenge I'd put out there to anybody that's in touch. Is I mentioned that courtroom video that's out there, but I now cannot find it, and I've asked county officials that worked in the courthouse, but it was the fella that showed me that YouTube or whatever it was of the spirit in the courtroom, spirit of Andy Taylor, if you will,
Really?
that settled in seat number 12, jury seat number 12.
We'll have to look for that.
I can't. I think it was on YouTube, but even the courthouse officials I've talked to say they don't know. The court officer that showed it to me has passed away. He's not around anymore. So I don't. I would challenge anybody listening or anybody in touch or checking the podcast later, if you know anything about the old video or YouTube of the spirit in the county courtroom, the Loudon courtroom, to let us know about it. And because that would be another visual,
Yes.
David, that we've talked about that I could use. So, and I'm sure you guys would like to see it too.
Yes, that would be awesome.
So it's out there. I even remember on one of the first ghost tours, somebody pulled it up on their phone and showed me. And I didn't have my glasses. I didn't really see it, but people are going, wow. So it's out there.
We'll
So
look for it.
we're putting out a
Get it to you.
challenge, just like if anybody can find that, help us out.
If we could find it, or you could find it, send it to us. And if we could find it, or someone finds it and sends it to us, we'll send it to you.
And the same thing, as I said, I'm no authority on ghost stories by any means. Everything I know has come from other people in Loudon. Anybody that has stories about of unusual stories about spirits or paranormal, or that, I'm sure you've asked them to help you as well, but especially about any old buildings in Loudon, I would love to hear more and learn more and enhance the experience, as they say.
Yes, absolutely. Jason, you have anything?
No.
It's been fun,
I'm all
guys.
out.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you, Bo.
Good food.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was
Yeah, we really appreciate you doing it.
Thank you.
Coming
Yeah.
on, telling. I
Taking
love
your
that
time.
story.
yeah.
Andy Taylor.
Lives on.
Hey, he could have been the reason the courthouse burnt down.
Could have been.
You know,
That's my theory.
it's crazy that they heard all those voices and stuff outside there. That's awesome. I wish I would have caught that on an EVP. It's really rare when you could hear it without the aid of electronics. That's rare.
John Cardwell took me into the basement of that courthouse because that's where a lot of he's trying. Am I off?
Nope.
Oh, you're good.
And it was odd. He was trying to point out to me that we need to preserve these archives. Now, this was before the fire. And I said, it's sort of creepy down here. It's a basement. And I'm 6'3", and I was having to hunker down to crawl around in there. And there was all those old wet files and stuff. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that." And about that time, a rat ran right across in front of me and ran up the wall or something. And I said, "John, I think I've seen enough." And he took me back deeper, and a snake crawled around right behind me.
Oh, my Lord.
Where there's mice, there's snakes. And so I thought, so that's my creepy courthouse experience, and I don't think it had anything to do with Andy Taylor.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, man. We want to thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want everybody to remember you can find Bo on Facebook at Bo Carey History Tours, and you can go over to his website at bocareyhistorytours.weebly.com and get in touch with him.
Yep.
Take a tour. They're fun.
Oh, they're fun. Yeah, we've taken both tours. We took both.
He's
of them.
also available for lectures.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Hit him up.
Battle of Athens.
Hit him up.
Thank you, fellas.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Remember, we are live on Spreaker and Podbean, and also paranormal411.org every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tonight, our guest was Bo Carey, and his awesome stories, and your history buffs, right?
Yep.
We try. So tonight, this was brought to you by Paranormal 411. And your hosts are David and Jason.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we'll see you next week, unless we do a short show sometime during the week. Again, want to thank everybody and appreciate everybody that listens to the live shows and comes in on our podcasts. Have a good night. Thanks for listening to the show. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Paranormal411. Join us on the website at paranormal411.org. It's free to sign up and become a member. All of our upcoming shows are on the guest and events page. You can also listen to past shows on the website as well. And if you like the show and want to support us, you can do that by becoming a premium member for only $2 a month. Thanks for listening to Paranormal 411. Join us.